Hello, my name is Charles Faulkner, and I'm about to guide you into new worlds. These worlds have been around for centuries. They've been in you and around you and your ancestors. These worlds are metaphors. People have used metaphors in poetry and story to describe great accomplishments, in battles, in love, in human events. And it turns out that metaphors go much deeper. They shape our thinking, what we value, what we want, even what we believe. In other programs, like Metaphors of Identity, I've gone into how people are living inside unconscious metaphors, metaphors they identify with, that shape their desires. In this program, we're going to go into another kind of unconscious metaphor, the metaphors of movement. For whenever we want anything, we need to get from one place to another. Where we are is here. What we want is not here. It's away from us, a place we will go. And so in this, I'll be guiding you towards the goals you have and the accomplishments that you value and the life that you want to lead, metaphorically. As I said, these are unconscious. It will be a coming of awareness of what you already are living. Even more importantly, I'll show you how you can discover what these metaphors are in order to enhance them, to change them, and to add new choices to your life. On this first tape, we're going to explore the idea of your own inner landscape. That when we go for a goal, a desire, an outcome, that we encounter difficulties along the way. These can be barriers, gaps, and other experiences. I will do a demonstration with Tom and several other people to introduce you to this idea that we are all living in an inner world. So welcome to the seminar, Worlds Within a Word. Welcome to Worlds Within a Word. I'm Charles Faulkner, and I'll be your guide on a journey into new experiences today. A number of you might know my metaphor work, Metaphors of Identity. Several years back, I got very interested when I was looking into human consciousness is how do people move through life? How do they get from one place to another? And after many years of work with different approaches, I came up with this question which I offer to you. How do you know what to want? We all want all sorts of things. Some of us want family, some of us want career, some of us want adventure. How do we know what to want? And I got very interested in this question about the same time I found a field called cognitive linguistics. They were looking at what were the metaphors that guide people's lives. And I looked at that and went, if argument could be a war, or argument could be making a building, or argument could be connecting with people, if the metaphors worked at this linguistic level where these very serious and accomplished researchers were working, what could happen if people had these? And as I began to look, I found they did. People had metaphors in their lives. Organizations, businesses had metaphors. They had metaphors of a game, that business was a game you'd win, or business was war, or it was a family, or it was creating some sort of an empire. And as I looked further, I found that these would guide not only what they wanted in life, but the values they'd hold, the beliefs that they had, the very way that they moved through the world. I began to wonder about this further. If someone had the metaphor of a journey, say sailing, and they're sailing through life, well, sometimes it's going to be choppy waters. Sometimes they're going to get to a desert island that's going to be really wonderful. Sometimes they're going to be on the open seas with the wind behind them. Sometimes they're going to be in a storm. And I began to think about the seasons of a life that a person could have. That first you have to row a little boat if you want to learn to sail. And then you get a small boat and you take it out in the harbor a little bit. And later you get your big sailboat and you go out on the open waters and you're ready for adventure. And eventually that boat gets old and needs to be brought into dry dock to cleaned up. And that lives are like that too, and businesses can be like that. That a business could start out as a small entrepreneurial venture, and it could grow up and get strong and go out on its own and conquer the world. And I looked at these different types of metaphors as the seasons, how they cycled through the spring, the summer, the fall, and the winter. And I thought I was done. I thought I'd made a good run of figuring this out and also how to change them. And then I had an experience with a client in a situation very much like this. And this woman turned to me and she says, I want to matter. And I was stopped. Because, of course, I heard that she wanted to feel significant, that the professional work she did and the work she did with her family was important to her. But I also heard the metaphor. She wanted to be matter. She wanted to be as solid as her car or her house or her furniture and to be acknowledged as much. And then I began to remember that cliche that there is a metaphor in every word. But it was a cliche. How could one make use of that? And I came across a story by John Berger, actually a dream. He's a writer living in France now. And his dream was that there was a land where people, in order to make themselves understood, what they would do is every word, a noun, a verb, an adverb, doesn't matter what it is, every word would have an actual object appear. A neat trick, but of course you can do this in a dream. And so whenever people spoke, what they were talking about would appear as these objects. And it didn't matter whether it was an action. If it was digging, they'd see digging. If it was love, they might see a mother and child. Each word would appear. So everything was very clear. Of course, after a while, this land got a little bit crowded. And at that point, the people in the land decided that what they would do is they would have the words stand for the things, so there wouldn't be so many things around. And at that point, he said, the words began to speak. John Berger is a writer. He said, I was thinking about the world of literature. I'm an investigator of consciousness, and I borrowed that and I said, he's thinking about every one of our human imaginations. Did you know the human imagination has only been a subject of scientific inquiry for 2 years? You could study creativity, that was all right. But the idea of imagination, and yet how do we know what to want if we don't imagine it in our future? How do we direct ourselves if we don't see where we are, see where we want to be? If we want to get dressed in the morning, we imagine what we might want to look like that day. Imagination is fundamental, and yet hasn't been a topic till recently. Well, I've begun to think that people don't have maps in their minds or structures as we're thinking. People actually have landscapes, whole lands. After all, we talk about going forward in life, that we move forward toward our future and we look back on our past. We'll talk about getting a view of things, and we know that that means we're above it. We'll talk about obstacles in life. And I began to hear those cliches like, I'm at the end of my rope, or I feel boxed in, or I'm blocked, or I'm on top of the world. And I began to wonder about those. And my wondering has led to this. Every one of us, individuals, organizations, even governments, we have metaphors of identity, metaphors that guide us, like life is sailing, or life is adventure, life is a story, life is a struggle. All of these. And we have a season we move in. We might be in the spring of our lives, the summer of our lives. And what these will do is they give us the meaning, the values, the goals. And there's a whole nother dimension, a dimension that's in every moment as we move through life. And that dimension is the how we get to where we want to go in life. What is the quality of our experience? How much are we enjoying our journey? How much are we enjoying growing in the world? So as a real way of getting the most out of these moments that we have together, allow me to invite you to right now write down a desire that you have. Write it down in your own words, for it will reveal a lot later on. Take a moment right now. Write down something, a desire that you have for yourself and your life. And when you've written down that desire, I'd also like you to write down what have you done or are you doing in order to achieve it. Write it down as a separate sentence, just a few spaces apart. What have you done or what are you doing in order to achieve that desire? And now a few lines below that. How is it that you're not there yet? Maybe an explanation or a review. How is it that you haven't achieved this goal yet? Okay. It's one of the great discoveries, or shall we say rediscoveries, of this century, is that human beings are drawn towards goals, towards ends. This is actually known by the Greeks, but we've managed to rediscover it, that we are not so much the past, although we can look into the past, but we are drawn towards certain ideas, certain places and experiences in our future. Well, another way of thinking about this, in the most primary way, is there's something we want that's over there, and we're here, and we don't have it. I call this a perceptual prime. It's the smallest possible way of thinking about something. That is that if I've got it, well, then I don't want it. Now, as human beings, we have goals flowing through our whole day. At a certain point, you have a desire for breakfast. You have a desire to fill yourself, and you didn't have it, and then you got breakfast, and when you have enough breakfast, you stop. You're done. You don't want any more. And the same thing happens with almost everything else in our life. It might be that we want to have excitement. We'll go to an amusement park. We'll go on an adventure trip. We'll do all sorts of things. We'll watch a football game, and it's exciting, and it's wonderful, and then it's done, and we're done with it. It wasn't in our experience. We brought it into our experience. It became us, and then another goal emerged. A way of thinking about the peak performance movement and the human potential movement was the idea, instead of it just being one small goal after another, that instead people began to put life goals out there. That was the thing behind Think and Grow Rich, was that Napoleon Hill discovered that people who exceeded in big ways had smaller goals, but also had bigger goals that they held constant. And yet once they would get that goal, well, then new opportunities would open up. Think about the idea of your inner landscape. The idea that you're here, and then further on in this landscape is this possibility, this desire that you'd like to have fulfilled. So there's a distance between you and it. In fact, if you think about it, first of all, there'd be a question of where is it and where are you? Those of you that have traveled in the wilderness or rented a car in a city that you haven't been in know this experience when the clerk says, well, puts a little X on the map, here's where you need to go, and you're looking at it and going, great, but where am I? Am I on this side of town or that side of town, or this side of the mountain or that side of the mountain? So both knowing where you are now and where you're going. And then there's the dimension of distance. How far is your goal? Is it a journey of 1,000 miles beginning with a single step, or is it just a walk across the street? And then, even if you've got the distance figured out, what's the direction? Which way do you go towards your goal? And what happens? You get a little sidetracked. You get back on. And are you faced toward your goal or where you came from? What we're introducing today is the idea of looking towards your goal, but a lot of you know that people, their goals are things like, well, I don't want this. I don't want to be stuck anymore. I don't want to be held back. I don't want to be blocked. But that's focusing on this. Where is it you'd want to go if you were unblocked, if you were free, if things were open? So I'd like you to take a moment and look at the goal that you wrote down, and first of all find out, is it written in a positive form? Is it something you can do something about? Is it something you're directed toward? Take a look at that. Is it where you don't want to be, or is it where you want to be? Is it what you want to draw into yourself? That's positive. Is it something that you'll know when you get there? There's an old phrase that you're not going to make it to a certain town if you're headed to another one. It's how would you know if you got there? What would you see? What would you hear? What would you feel that would let you know at least you had the beginnings of it? After all, you demand this of lunch. You demand this of a new car. It's interesting when people have words like success or progress, sometimes they don't bother to take the time and go, and what would I see, hear, and feel that would let me know I'd arrived at my destination, I was where I wanted to be? Take a moment and notice if you have in your mind, maybe not in your words on your page, but if you have in your mind that sense of your goal. Now, when I work with people, I find very often they want a lot of success for themselves, and I'm in favor of that. If you have big desires, you can make big things happen. And the funny thing is, though, when you ask them if they want something, they'll go, where do you want it? And they'll say, I want it everywhere. Well, I found this lately. If you think about this landscape in the mind, is it a landscape sort of in general? As you were driving here this morning, as you move through your life, do you kind of do things in general, or do you find, like me, that you put on specific clothing, that you eat specific foods, that you go specific places? It's kind of a funny thing. We want in general sometimes, but we live specifically. So take a moment to notice in your goal, in your desire, if you have it in a way that lets you know that you want specifically something, someplace, someone first. In other words, where and when and with whom do you have a sense that this goal is going to happen, this desire will be fulfilled? Now, some people in a field called neuro-linguistic programming offered these what are called well-formedness conditions. And they found people could get real successful, so successful they could build businesses and forget about their families. So successful they could achieve goals and forget to call their friends. So successful that they didn't take the bigger scope of life. So finally what I'd like you to do with your desire is to think about the bigger life you live. How is this goal going to add to and enrich that and not detract from it? Now some people think, well, that means if there's a conflict then I have to give up the goal? No. This means you take the goal and you think about how it will connect back with your family, how it will connect back with your friends, with your larger goals in life, so that it becomes part of your life, a way towards the fulfillment of more of your life. Now, with those ideas in mind, what I'm going to invite you to do now is to play in your brain. Because we've written down words. Words, as you know, probably are a left brain idea. You're familiar with the left brain and right brain? Nobody's in their right brain and what was left behind? The idea that the right brain is colorful and feminine and creative, and the left brain is black and white and digital and talks with an accent. You're familiar with this theory? Well, it turns out that there's something to that, but there's even more when you use all of your brain. So find a clear piece of paper, nothing on it, and allow me to invite you to make an image, a symbol, a drawing of what you desire. Make it big enough to see. You want to be able to see this goal. It's really good to use color on this and to draw it because color is across both hemispheres. The idea is you get the line on the left side, the color on the right side, and really begin to make this an integrated experience in your mind. It could be a drawing of the goal in your own capacity to draw. It could be a symbol of the goal. It doesn't need to make sense to anyone but you. You're the one, when you see it, it brings up the feeling, that's what I want, that's my desire. This is a time to make something vivid for your mind to think about. And make it big enough to see. I found that sometimes people, they draw small pictures, which really is saying more about the small landscape. It's time to enlarge the possibilities, to make it big enough you could look across the way and go, yeah, that's my desire. You can pause the tape now as you do so. Okay, we know you can keep adding to the image, making it richer and more vivid and more compelling to you. And it reaches a point where you look at it and you do recognize your desire in it. That your desire is at least symbolized there. You go, yeah, that's the sense of what I want. Let me set the scene. In a moment, I'm going to invite Tom, a member of our audience, to come up with his goal picture. We're going to stick that picture to the wall at a height that he enjoys, that he responds to as his goal. And then he's going to naturally step back, a distance that he in his mind has himself from his goal. Then I'm going to invite him to move closer to his goal and even closer. And then I'm going to invite him to move farther and farther away and notice how his feelings change. Then we're going to have him go back to where he originally started. So let's join the seminar now. So my question now is, who would like to be the first person here to make sure they inevitably get that desire fulfilled? Tom, would you be willing to come up?
Sure.
Thank you. So, Tom has chosen a representational image. That is, instead of something that would be symbolic or a color or something, you have a picture here of you on a stage.
Right.
Kind of like here. You've got this golden light shining down on you, and this is like a innumerable throng out here cheering. Is this
Thousands.
Okay.
They're applauding, cheering, smiling. They're happy.
Let's give them a taste of that right now.
Thank you. I like that. That's good.
Okay. What we're going to do is give you a little reality here. Because you don't have this goal yet.
No.
No. So there's some mental distance, if you will, between the goal that you have and where you are in your life. Yeah.
Yep.
So he's not there yet. Now, what if we play with that distance a little bit? What if we back you up here a little bit? Try it from back here.
That's a little too far.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like that.
Well, move in on it a little bit.
Okay. About right here.
How do you know?
There's a lot of things I need to do between now and then before I get there, and I have a pretty good idea what a lot of those are, but there's a lot of mystery in between here and there too.
Okay. So you can look at this as we're taking his mental landscape, the distance in his mind between where he is and where his goal is, and he actually can give us a distance marker here. He has a sense of that, as all of you have as well. What happens if we move you a little closer?
I'm not ready.
Okay, we'll move you back then. We'll move you back. Now, we've got this arranged in the sense it's a studio. It's just a flat and it's on eye level. Is that on eye level for you, or is that like an uphill climb? Is it like mucking and rucking through swamps and jungles and?
No, it's pretty much a straight shot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. If I may, I'd like to introduce another variable into this mindscape we have here. I'm now going to invite two men up from the studio audience to take hold of either end of a plastic wrap to form a barrier between Tom and his goal. Listen as Tom describes his inner world as he begins to deal with the difficulties he faces between where he is and where he wants to be. If I could have the two of you come up. Bruce, I'll put you over on this side here. And Philip, we'll have you stand right about here. I'm going to give you that.
Oh, no.
And let's put it right about that level for him, okay? Now, Tom, how's this beginning to look to you now?
Guess where I'm going.
Well, what if we lower it a little?
Wow, that's interesting. It's almost like when it was up here, it was like something I could get my hands on. Now it's almost to the point of being tripped over. There's a block there of different kind.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing. Is this somehow familiar for what you're encountering at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it might be.
Yeah.
I thought it might be. So what I'm going to do in a moment, I'm going to invite you to go get your goal. That is, I'm going to ask you once again, is it stated in the positive?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And is it something you have evidence for? You'll know if you get it.
No question about it.
And it's something you can do something about?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you know who, where, when, and with whom you'd like to have it? At least the first time, first couple of times.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've thought about how this will affect the rest of your life? Okay.
And as you're talking about that, it's all I'm focused on. It's this thing right here.
Well, is that your goal over there?
That's the goal over there, right. I want it.
Go get it.
Anything is open, right? Any possibilities, right? Well, I guess rather than fight this, I would rather let me do this. Is that Acceptable.
Okay.
I'm happy with this.
All right. Come on back here. And we'll have you two gentlemen just put it back up again. Because, see, Tom, we can't not do what's in our minds. I'm going to make a couple of statements about how I think you generally, not all the time, but generally approach goals. I want you to check on it.
Okay.
Does this fit for you or not? That what you very often do is you'll have your goal in mind, and then you'll look to an external authority and you'll ask them what they think about it.
Yes.
And you'll come up to the goal and you'll stop and you'll wonder about different things and talk to yourself about it, and then try different options, and then you'll go up to your goal, but you won't actually get it. You'll get all the way up to your goal and you'll turn back to the authority again.
Yes. Yes.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, allow me to invite you to consider that each one of you, as you were going through this process, didn't you also think about how you would deal with the barrier? Some of you may have wanted to break through it, right? And some of you may have wanted just to walk around it. Some of you may have wanted to tear it apart. And there's other possibilities as well.
Yeah, a lot of that went through my mind. Is it okay? Is this okay? Is that okay?
Okay.
Like, what are the okays?
And my question is that a typical kind of thing that you do?
Yes.
You think about whether it's okay or not.
Right, right. A lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
Now, that's the way Tom does it. Others of you might do other things. You see, even if you break through barriers all the time, that's the way that you go for your goals. Consider that that's the only way or one of a few ways you have of doing it. What if you had other ways of doing it? What if you could recode and change in your mind not only your goals, but how you get there? Now, many people at this point, if they've gone around or under, they begin to think about breaking through, that they're just going to break through it. In fact, you've probably been running that for a few minutes now.
It went for a while, yeah.
Yeah. So you've already done that in your mind several times. So what I'm going to ask you to think about is what would be off your map? That is, if you'll do something that's not you, then you'll have all the flexible choices in between. So what would be a way of interacting with this that would be very different from what you are known to do, what you're accustomed to doing?
For me, would be to fight through something that seems to be a barrier without looking at other options.
Okay.
That would be very different for
That
me.
would be very different for you.
Yeah, to put more effort in than would really be necessary. So
Okay.
that would be very different for me to do that.
May I offer you a suggestion as you're about to do that?
So I'm about to do that, okay?
Go do it now.
Go do it now.
Go do it now.
Okay. Hey,
All right.
that was easier than I thought.
Take the goal.
Okay. I may have that now?
No.
Oh, okay. I didn't
No.
think so.
What we're going to do is have you come back here once
Okay.
more. And we'll put you right here. We're going to put the goal back up. And gentlemen, if you would reassemble the barrier. I first saw this exercise with Deanna Sanger and Chris Dunkel of a Canadian NLP center. And they did this, and I was fascinated with it. And John Grinder saw it, co-founder of NLP, and he looked at this and he says, yeah, you know, except that in life, how often are our barriers passive? Now we're going to increase Tom's difficulties. In addition to the plastic barrier, I'm inviting a large, tall man, John, and a petite woman, Gina, to join us in the front of the room and to stand as living barriers between Tom and his goal. Again, listen and notice how Tom's inner world is revealed as he deals with these difficulties. If I could have some active barriers up here. Hi there. Okay, we'll put you over here. And I picked a nice regular sized guy
little
for you.
guy, right, right.
We'll put you right here in front here.
Okay.
Now, the response, is this beginning to seem,
Yeah, real.
is this beginning to seem real?
It's real.
Okay, is this beginning to seem real?
This is very real. Yeah,
Okay.
that's even realer.
All right, so, at this point, can you see your goal over there?
No.
Can you imagine it's over there?
I know
Can
it's
you
there.
Sneak a look at it?
I know it's there. I
Okay.
peek every now and then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, these people are here representing certain kinds of barriers in your life. And they're going to respect you enough not to just let you by. But if he gets by, then you be respectful of him. Or if he convinces you to let him by, whatever it is. Okay? So is that your goal over there?
That is it. That is it.
You
yes.
still want it?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Go get it.
Hi, John. How are you? It's really good to see you. You know, one of the things I really like about working these workshops and that sort of thing is the image that you can have out here and how helpful it is when people are able to be able to just look into the future over here and see how important it is to be able to be helpful to other folks. And hi, how are you? It's nice to see you. Nice jewelry. I like that. That's really neat. How are you doing?
Oh, fine.
Did I show you the picture that I drew over here? Look at this. It is so neat. It is the colors. What do you think of the colors? Isn't that nice? I really thought that was neat about looking at this.
Tom has just talked his way to his goal, being charming and engaging. In the same way that Tom turned to authority when he first faced the barrier, Tom's talking and charming will most likely be the strategy he will use when dealing with other people. That is with the living barriers in his life. And he can develop new ones. And I've had people turn it into knockdown dragouts. But as we look at all this...
I'm not with somebody like that.
Well, that's the thing. You make an assessment. If you only had the one pattern of breaking through, and then you get to meet John, or his equivalent in terms of your life, well then, what do? Flexibility. The other thing that I find fascinating about this is with all the people up here, almost no one ever turns to the people outside of this little thing and said, would you get me my goal? Would you be willing to help me get my goal? It's fascinating to me that in this age of goal setting and achievement and direction, that very often we get so focused on the goal and so focused on the participants, whether they're assisting us or whether they're blocks, that we don't realize we could just widen our circle a little bit, make our landscape in our mind a bit wider, and engage other people who go, yeah, I'd be happy to go get it, and bring it to you. Thank them for coming up here.
Thank you.
Take that goal.
Got it. Come on.
Thank you. So, for how many of you did you do something different than Tom just did as you were looking at that? You found that you might have slid underneath. You might have tried to take John and move him aside or tackle him or get around him. And what about Gina? That was on purpose. The idea, how is it different for you if you have a man who's blocking your way or a woman? Of course, being a man or a woman is going to change this in some ways, most likely. And how is the response different? And think about, what did you do in your mind that was different from the way that you did it the first time? Allow me to suggest right now that you vividly imagine another way of doing it. You may pause the tape for as long as you need. The idea in the mind is that if you practice something, you can send your mind in a direction. If you begin to rehearse something, you can begin to move yourself in that direction. Athletes have known about this since who knows when. And yet, each of us can also do the same thing. Not only about the goal, but rehearsing other ways of getting to the goal. Not from the outside like we're watching it in a movie, but as if we're actually the participant of it. And the more different ways we have to do that, the more flexibility we'll have. Now, having said that, I want you to know I tricked you. But it's the kind of trick we run into in life all the time. And the trick is this, is by putting the barrier up there, how many of you began to think that you had a barrier to your goal, to your desire? And yet I found when I began to investigate the metaphors of how people get from here in their life to their desires, I found very often They don't have barriers. You might look back now on those lines I asked you to write at the beginning, and what do you want, and how will you know, how do you try to get there, and how is it that you're not there now? If you look over those sentences, you might begin to notice that there are other possibilities. For instance, the first thing is there's where you are and the goal. So the locations, knowing where that is. The second one is the direction. We've already taken care by making sure you stated in the positive that you're looking toward your goal and not at your difficulty. But you might want to double check on that, and you'll hear people do that a lot. Then the thing about the distance. What's your mental distance from it? What happens if you shorten that distance? Some people get discouraged just because they feel their goal is so far away. Or they get so close, they go, oh, I'm almost there, and then they let up, and it slips away. And what about being off track, wandering off? What is your metaphor or metaphors of movement? Take all the time you want to review what you have written down in order to find your metaphors for how you do your life. Remember that each word can be a metaphor. Look at them that way and discover your own. Pause the tape for as long as you'd like. But as I say, we tend to rely on a few of them when we have a multitude of choices. People go, well, this is good. In fact, if you look at a lot of the peak performance and human potential movement, what they'll do is when they find if you're blocked, well, what should you do? Do anything you can. Go under, go around, go over, break through it. And you carve a hole in it. And that'll work. And what you do is you pour the resources into getting over that block. Right, Tom? But where's the block? So a funny thing happens. People go out into the world to get more resources to overcome an image in their mind. And what that does is it reinforces the idea, do it that way. Every time the person succeeds in overcoming the block. In fact, you may know there's some famous peak performance consultants now who have you go through these travails of glass or hot coals or boards or these things. And you do that and you bring all the resources to that. And you develop tremendous resources doing that. That's true. And that means the next time your brain will go, so I'll think of the next difficulty as a block. I want to invite another kind of thinking. There's another possibility because in this adding resource to this is the ultimate technique theory. What we need to do is find the ultimate technique that'll change everything. I think human beings have more flexibility than that. I think we have more diversity than that. We have more potential. And I'd like to demonstrate that right now. So who has a sense of what your metaphor for the desire that you wrote down is? Let's take a moment and hear what you've got. Let's hear some of them.
Building.
So you're building something. Okay. Creating, building. What's another one?
Connecting.
Connecting.
Unleashing.
Unleashing.
Growing.
Growing. Now understand, think of these as actual images in your mind. That is, the person is growing something. They're actually unleashing something. Go, go, go. They're actually connecting something. These, it turns out, are not just turns of phrase, but they're actual ways we organize our thinking. The way we organize how we get through our lives. Some other ones.
Exploration.
Exploration. So exploring.
Integrating.
Integrating. Bringing together in some way.
Climbing.
Climbing. Okay. That's the getting up to higher and higher heights. Okay. I'd like to show a couple of those, if I may. What we're going to do is we can actually have you bring your goal, yeah. And this is, again, representational here. Or is this more symbolic?
Symbolic.
Yeah, but a nature scene. Mm-hmm. Is this a sun here in the mountains?
Well, that would be one way to think about it. It really symbolizes more financial success,
All right.
building of a business.
Okay. I'm going to put it over here like we did before. And have you, in your mental landscape, put yourself in relationship to that. What's your mental distance from that?
Right here.
Okay. And you have that sense of wanting to be unleashed.
Mm-hmm.
And how's that sort of being, is that you're being unleashed or resources are being unleashed?
It's about unleashing my own potential.
Okay. Okay. Now, this is where I say that she's been using this unleashing for a while, and it worked at lower levels. So she's continued to use it more and more with more and more difficulties and desires. The thing is that she can keep adding more resources to that, or she can do it differently. And that's what I'd like just to have you step back here and consider, what's another metaphor that if you use it, you go to your goal. For instance, could you get stuck? Or do you just you get stuck and you move right on? Or do you get lost? And you really get lost, oh my God, I'm lost, I'm out here. Or it's like you get lost and boom, you're right back on track.
I don't get lost.
See, what you're doing, you find a metaphor where the person, it doesn't happen for them. So what I'd like you to do is to get into the mindset of a time where you got a little lost, and you immediately found your way back. You may take a moment to find one of those, because it's something that she doesn't think about as needing extra resources for. She's already the master of it.
Well, I might get a map or something,
Yeah. So you can remember a time like that.
Mm-hmm.
So remember, this is about the specifics. And that is that, so I want you to think of a time that happened
Okay.
in mind and body.
Mm-hmm.
And then I want you to walk back through that experience of wanting to be unleashed, holding in your mind that moment when you were a little lost, you got a map, and you got back on track.
Okay. You want me to walk that way?
And then just walk right through it there.
This way.
Okay. So come back here now, and I want you to go back through that first experience we did and notice how it's changed. Like, what happens now when you think about how you're going for this goal? Do you need to get unleashed now?
No, I thought about getting a, like with getting lost, just getting a map.
Yeah.
Getting, stopping and asking for directions, and then you just go.
Yeah. So just go. Thank you. All right, let me show that more clearly with someone else, because it's deceptively simple. What we're doing here is we find out the metaphor that the person is currently using to get to their desire and have them live a little of that experience. You can see Jeannie was kind of pulling on the leash there. And then I had her step back and I said, now, what would be another metaphor that would be incredibly easy for you? You naturally do it. You don't get lost, you're right back on track. Nobody could hold you back. Barriers, what are barriers? It's whatever it is that's different from this one. And get that in mind and body, and then live through with the new metaphor, and it will change that one. This is adding real flexibility of perception. You're looking at the situation with a different set of values, a different set of beliefs, a different way of getting there. Who else would like to try it? Yes? Yeah, you need your picture here. So that's quite Picasso.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I see hearts here and different people and different groups, and it looks like they're connected by light.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this is obviously more symbolic.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It would be.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to put this over here to give you that sense of a distance between.
It needs to go up.
Okay.
That's better.
This is a high goal. This is a high level desire.
Yes.
And when you find your sense of distance between those, okay, and you said you have a sense of, in order to get there, you need to build, you need to create.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I'd like you to take a few steps of that, imagining that building and creating that you have in mind.
Okay.
Okay. And then step around and back before it here. And now what I'd like you to do is to think about what is a metaphor that is really different, that is just, it's easy for you. It's like you slide right through. It's not one that you have to, in building and creating, got all these things you have to get and put them together. At least that's one way to think about them. And yet it could be that when you get focused, you just go for something. Or it could be that if somebody was trying to distract you or get you off track, you'd be right back on track.
If somebody asks me for help, it's easy. Then I know what to do.
And then, so if somebody asks for your help, then you know what to do. So it's a little different way of doing it. This is the person now. And so what I'd like you to do is imagine somebody like Sally ask you for help.
Okay.
And what I'd like you to do is to think of a time when somebody did ask you for help and you were right there and helped them. Right?
Do that.
That experience. You want to take a real experience of when it was very easy to use that metaphor and get that in mind and body, and then walk back through that experience and find what happens.
Okay.
Okay? Is it different now?
Yes, I like it.
Yeah. So what is it like when you think about going for this now?
There's more movement. There's more.
We saw that, yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's get one of the gentlemen up here. Bruce. So let's look at yours. Oh yeah, yours is,
Oh, it's actually like this.
wow. That's
That's not symbolic. That's no.
That's-
It actually is.
it's rich colors, circles of colors, and then a heart at one end, and these are rays of light coming off of it.
Right, actually coming into it.
Ooh, okay. So we'll put that. I have to not to check the level here. Is this going to be about right for you?
Perfect.
All right. And your sense of the distance that you have from this. So you're pretty close. And yet there's a thing about this that you're not experiencing that.
Right.
Yeah. So there's an experience that you're not there yet.
Correct. Yes.
And how do you sense that you're not there?
I keep falling into struggling to get there.
Okay, so you keep falling into struggling. Are you struggling with actual people or with ideas?
With people.
Or with actual people, okay. And you appear to me to be somebody who has a lot of go for it. So you're willing to get into that.
Yes.
Yeah. And yet, is there another way to do it? Yes. What I'd like you to do first is have a few moments of an experience of that struggle. And you could stand there with it, or you could move a couple steps with it, but have a sense of, yeah, this is a struggle for you. Okay, and I want you to step over here and leave that there. And now I'd like you to think about what is another way that you approach things, and you go right through. It's really easy. And again, it may be something like, does he get stuck? No, he doesn't. He just gets moving again. Does he get off track? No, he's right back on track. Does he lose direction and begin to focus in on things? No, he's got a good sense of direction. Or does he break through barriers? Does it easily? It's like, what's in one that's easy for you to do?
I think getting off track is
Okay.
easy. Getting back on track.
Getting track is easy for you.
Yeah, that straight line in the goal
Yeah.
represents staying right on track.
So think of a specific time in your life when you got off track. You noticed it, boom, you're right back on track again. And think of that specific time and hold it in your mind's eye, ear, and in your body as well. And then walk through that experience there, holding that, getting back on track.
Yeah,
Okay.
that worked.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay. They say that language is based in metaphor. This is the theory of George Lakoff and Mark Johnson. And yet the real question that I wanted you to ask is, when you know what your metaphor is, it's who's living the metaphor? Are you living the metaphor, or is the metaphor living you? A way of thinking about these experiences that we have, and there's certain personal metaphors or cultural metaphors, it might be time to put down and take up something new, take up a new possibility. What I've offered here is a doorway into a new way of experiencing life. Not towards one technique or one possibility, but a multiplicity of possibilities. That as many different kinds of metaphors there are, as many possibilities. You've seen a few demonstrations up here, and you have your own in your lives around you. What becomes interesting is not which one works, because they'll all work in different situations, but rather, how can we begin to develop so much flexibility that we naturally move in a way that's elegant through the world? The idea behind this seminar is increasing one's satisfaction and one's quality of life. We can't not have dreams and desires. What I want to add to that is we can also enjoy the journey, the story, the path to those experiences. And if you find that you're satisfied, well, then make your dreams bigger, because there's no limit to the human imagination. On this tape, we're going to move beyond the particulars of a symbolic barrier. After all, there are other kinds of difficulties on the way to our goals. We're going to explore your own personal inner landscape in terms of its terrain. How is the ground underneath you? In terms of its burdens, what are you having to carry with you? In terms of the people and the personalizations around you and the energy you bring to that event. We're going to explore the scale of things, the size of your inner world, and how it all relates and creates your own unconscious world within a word. The worlds within a word. The idea, the metaphors along that journey or along that path have to do with the actual mental terrain, the mental territory that people are going through. And you have a list of possibilities. And the possibilities are on both sides, because some people, more people than not, will organize to notice the difficulty more than they will to notice how they're going to get there. So for instance, people will look at the problem more than they'll look at the solution. Now, understand that this problem-solution thing, if somebody's looking at the problem, they're looking at the away from, they've got to get rid of this problem, you've got to do something about this problem. It's a metaphor. We don't think of it that way, but what's a problem? What's the square root of 297? Yuck, right. But the thing is that for most people, the metaphor of a problem is that once you've solved the problem, it stays solved. You don't have to go back and solve it again. And when people apply that metaphor like to money, people say I have money problems. Like once they've solved it, they'll never have to touch a dollar or even a 20 or 100 again. You can see there's a misapplication of metaphor. Most people, problem is like we encountered in high school, junior high, somewhere in there. It's not like a mathematician who works their whole life and never solves the problem and still feels like they had a great career because they investigate all these great things, right? The other side, though, is that some people say, I'm a real solution-oriented person. I only use a solution-oriented approach. Now, it has the advantage of being on the positive side. That is, the person is going for something. They have a well-formed idea about what they want. The disadvantage, though, is that solution is relative to what? The problem. So that a person, even if they're solution-oriented, they're going to look for solutions within the domain, within the idea of the problem. My friend Al calls this the problem orientation problem, or the error correction error. That is, if you're only correcting for that error, if you're only looking at the solution to that problem, the number of solutions you're going to come up with are going to be very limited. That is an example of the metaphors and an example of the two sides of this. The difficulty, the problem on one side, the desire, solution on the other side. When people think of either end of that, they're automatically going to think of the other end, as they will with all the other examples. For instance, if somebody's stuck, well, they don't want to sink into the ooze. No, they want to get free. Or if somebody feels held back, they want to be released. Or if somebody feels blocked, they want to break through. So you can work with either side. And it won't really matter in the sense that the person is still limited the number and type of metaphor to that particular set, to that particular example. So somebody feels confused or lost, they're going to want to get focused. Now, it turns out that there are 9 different classes or 9 different types of things you can think about. The first 4 have to do with the actual path. For instance, in terms of the path, there's the location. Where is the here and where is the there? Once you've got that, then the sense of the distance. What's the distance between the here and the there? What's the difference between where they are and that desire they want to make part of themselves? And you saw that people will physicalize that distance. They actually know when they're, quote, too close. And then there's the direction. Now there's 2 qualities to the direction. One quality is the direction is which way you're facing. Is the person facing toward, so to speak, toward the desire, or are they directed to the difficulty? Those of you with a neuro-linguistic programming background will notice that the person has their direction of attention toward the difficulty, that is in the direction of the difficulty, we call that away from. Because after all, they want to get rid of the problem. They want to break free. They want to get not confused anymore. In other words, they want to get away from confusion, get away from the block. They want to get out of trouble. On the other hand, if a person is attending toward the desire, that's what's known as toward in the NLP meta programs. The direction of the motivation. That's one quality. The other quality, of course, is how much on or off of this line or this path are they? This is where the idea of getting lost, sidetracked, distracted. Oh yeah, I was headed towards my goal, and then I got into this relationship, I got totally distracted and I forgot about it. The idea that they were on track and then they wandered off in another direction. And the fourth quality about the path, these are all about the nature of the path, that line from here to there, from where we are to where we want to get in terms of our desires, is how quickly we're getting there, the momentum. So if somebody's going slow, they might feel like they're stagnating. Now, you might look at how fast they're going on their journey and you'd say, wow, you're going a pretty good clip. Understand, this is all subjective. This is their inner landscape, their inner land. And I found that a better word to use than to say inner world or inner map or model. Map and model are too dissociated. When you look at a map, you're not seeing something that's rich. You're seeing something it's a drawing. If you see a model, a model as in not real. It's so funny, we live in a culture that's so interested in models. These are people pretending to be real people. The idea is that a person has an inner world, and there's a richness about that world, even to the extent that when you begin to elicit it, you can find out how far they are from their desire, what the territory looks like on the way to their desire, what the shape of the blockages and the difficulties are, what's behind them. After all, we talk about our future being in front of us, our past behind us. These metaphoric phrases that are made use of in different fields become real. Just assume that they actually have this world, this full 3D color, rich world inside, and it'll begin to make more sense. Because the next ones here, the next set has to do with the nature of that world. That is, what is the territory like between where they are now and where they want to go? Now, this will give you the types of difficulties. So that if you're having a difficulty with finding out what yours is or what somebody else's is, you can begin to think about them as part of a group as opposed to individual. For instance, the most common one that's culturally reinforced is blocks, although consider also it could be gaps. Just think of Indiana Jones when he has to make that leap of faith into the cavern. That was as much of a block as a wall is. But most people think of blocks as walls, not as a gap. If a person doesn't know how to get from here to there, as Tom was saying, that it's mysterious in some ways, that's a gap. It's a gap in his map, it's a gap in his territory, in his mental landscape. Blocks can be as small as a brick wall, as big as a mountain. Gaps can be, you know, a little fissure in the ground or a great lake. Terrain. This is the idea that I was talking about, that is it uphill or downhill? Is it rough or is it smooth? Is it easily traveled on foot, or can you use mechanized transportation? What are your choices there? There's a lot of metaphoric implications in terrain. That is that up is better, down is not as good. It's like, what if you could just like skiing, what if you got to the edge of the ski lodge and you're looking down a little tiny ski lodge down at the bottom there, and that was your desire. And you just like lean forward a little bit on your skis, and you know you're going to get there. The only question is how. You may do a nice slalom down, nice slow, really enjoy going back and forth and seeing the sights and feeling the skiing. You may be like Jack Nicholson and point your skis directly at the lodge and just go as fast as you can to get there. You may be a less experienced skier like myself and tumble part of the way down. But the point is, if you think about it that way, it's still inevitable that you're going to get there. It's an interesting kind of shift in terrain. What's the terrain between the here and the there that a person has? Is it rough going? Is it smooth sailing? Is it choppy waters? Less noticed these days, but certainly important, are burdens. This is a very classical idea. It goes back to the larger metaphors. Life is a burden. Any day now, I shall be released. It's the idea that life is hard and difficult and your reward is in another life. And yet, we also have more recent examples of this, like he ain't heavy, he's my brother. The idea of carrying other people, the burden, that a family member might be a burden, or you might have your work might be a burden you have to carry. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Hermann Hesse story, the Steppenwolf. And there's this scene towards the end, and these great composers are dragging behind them all of the people that have liked their work and all the people that have copied their work. And there's this huge train of people behind Beethoven and Bach as they're going across the desert. This idea of a burden being carried along. Understand, this is a subjective sense. It's not that people don't have family responsibilities or don't take their jobs seriously. But it's quite different to have a sense of responsibility for one's loved ones and one's life and one's work, and to experience it as a burden. That's the metaphoric difference there. Then the next group is persons and personalizations. Now the idea here is that this is the active barrier, because barriers are where? They're in front of you. So what if something's holding you back? Well, some thing's holding you back. Well, that's, you've personified it in some way. You've turned it into a person or something that has the quality of being alive. You know, I'm being held down. There's a glass ceiling and they won't let me get through it. All this idea of personalizing. Words like trapped or blinded or I'm boxed in. Well, who boxed you in? The idea is that maybe the person would say the environment, the economy, money, whatever it is, but they think about it as if it actually is an active entity working against them and personalize it. And then, of course, there's actual persons that, because their goals are not in agreement with yours, like what we symbolized up here when John was standing in the way, holding back Tom, it was like then you get a personalization of it. And finally, and yet very importantly, of course, is energy. Does a person have the energy for the trip, for the journey? You know, are they running on empty, running wild, or do they got a full tank of gas and the future's so bright they have to wear shades? It's this difference of what are they bringing to it in terms of their emotional states. Obviously the last one addressing that. The reason I say I give you all these different types, and understand there's the different types, and there's the difficulty side of it, and there's the desire side of it. So with this, you can begin to map out for yourself and for those that you are around you that you're interested in working with or in a company setting, is you can start to go, what metaphors are we using in this situation, particularly are you using in this situation? And what side of it are you playing more on? Is it getting away from a certain thing or is it getting toward? Understand they're both a trap. Toward is not better in the sense that it really offers you more choice. It gets you direction, which is good. But then you want to look at shifting it to a different metaphor. Or if I may at this point even encourage different metaphors for which you do not need to add more resources to make them happen. That's a way of understanding the situation. Is you've got this idea that you've got to unleash this, or that you're stuck, or things are stagnant, and so you have to go and take a seminar or something like that. Well, that's an outside resource that's going to help you change this internal way of thinking. Why not just change the internal way of thinking? Find a metaphor from another group that you're already good at. Now, the way I phrase it normally is, well, what's another situation? And I just start to offer the person specific examples because, in fact, most people don't think in terms of these categories. They think in terms of specific ideas. Like, are you feeling confused? Or are you like almost there but you're running out of energy? Or they go, oh, I never run out of energy. Okay. So I'll begin to offer suggestions to the person about different possibilities, different ways that are different from the way they've got it. And when they've got one of those, I'll have them live that particular moment when they did it well, in mind and body. Hold that in mind and then relive the way it was coded the first time. At that point, the brain, based on principles of neurology, will pick the better choice. Those of you familiar with neuro-linguistic programming will know from the fast phobia process, the one that relieves traumas and phobias in just a few minutes, is the original coding on that experience is the person sees the traumatic situation and relives it as if it's happening, terrorizing them. But they found that if you just had the person visualize the situation as if it were happening to someone else, and visualize from beginning to end, the next time the brain encounters that situation, it will choose to do it from the position of viewing it as if it happened to somebody else. You could go back and re-experience the trauma, but the brain doesn't do that. This is an unconscious process. Nobody chooses not to have a phobia. It's simply when you offer a better neurological pathway into the brain will take it. This is the ecology that is built into this work as well. If you offer the person a different metaphor that doesn't work as well, you won't get the results, or you'll get a partial shift. So you needn't be concerned about finding the right metaphor. Simply, it's finding a different one. And if you need to run a couple of them through there, then you run a couple of them. Understand that the more you do that, the more choices they'll have of how they think about, how they experience the meaning and organization of that moment. So once again, the structure of the exercise is you'll look on your couple of sentences that you wrote down. You have a desire, you have how you are endeavoring to get there or have tried to get there, and the third sentence is, how is it that you're not? If you look through those sentences, you will find metaphors either popping out at you now or beginning to emerge. Things that don't look like metaphors at first. Words like creating or building. Words like, I've got to take time. Well, that's like taking something. There are metaphors in each one of these. You pull out the theme or pull out the metaphor that you notice. Have the person live that experience relative to that desire. So when we had Jeannie would live that moment. She said, well, I have this sense of wanting to be unleashed. And so we put up her desire, and you can just imagine the desire. And then she had that sense of what does that feel like? It was kind of interesting to watch her non-verbally. She almost kind of pulled a little bit. Then I had her step out of that moment. And then I said, what's another kind of way of doing it? And she tried on a different one. She got a particular moment in mind and body and then walked through it. And you saw she, boom, went right up to the goal. Because it's not coded the same. The brain said, good choice, we'll take it. If the person kind of goes, no, well, then you come back and you add another one. So, questions on this? Yeah? Gene.
Does every desire or goal have a metaphor?
He's asking, does every desire or goal have a metaphor? And I would say it's embedded in a metaphor. That is, that it's not that it is the metaphor necessarily, but when somebody has a certain experience that they want, why would they want that instead of something else? You see winning, losing, that doesn't tell you the metaphor, but that implies this metaphor of winning. Or if somebody says they want to be the top of their field, and this could be a biologist for all that matters, and the person does have in their mind the metaphor of being at the peak among people. So in that sense we're looking for the metaphor, but not so much in the desire, but in the how they are getting there. So that's why that last question of how is it that you don't yet have that desire? What did you have for that? When I ask you, write down, how is it that you don't yet have that desire? That's one of the questions that'll just be gold as far as getting you what's the metaphor that's holding them or keeping them from having
Mine
it.
is I haven't found all my resources.
Okay, metaphor. It's like I haven't found all my resources. And that's a new one for me, by the way, but that's great. When he says that, he's still in the same model. That's the point, is that he's going, okay, well, I needed to find him here, so obviously I need to find out what I used before. This is like problem solution. This is like being stuck, getting free. This is good. I mean, his brain's working. He's inside that model, though. The real freedom comes in stepping out of it. So then I'd say, you're a big guy. Could anybody hold you back? Has anybody ever held you back from doing something?
No.
No. Now, that was just a guess on my part. If he'd said yes, I would go to another one. I go, well, do you ever get off track? No. Do you ever find yourself stuck? And I go through here, and he might go, yeah. Scratch it, find another one. Could anybody hold you down?
Yes.
What was the one that he said no, held back? So when was a time that you felt held back, but you went, shook that off and went on your way?
When I was held back?
Yeah, and you want to think of a time in your life that either actually, physically, or more metaphorically happened. Like somebody said, Gene, you can't do that. And you went, right, you know, and you just went and did it.
Well, again, I'd say it was myself and maybe financially that I couldn't do it.
But you just found you went and did it anyway.
I'd find a way, yeah.
Okay, now there's two things to notice about how Gene's using language. He said, I'd find a way, like he would find a way. What we're looking for here in the contrast, we're looking for an experience where he did encounter a situation and just whoosh, went right out to the desire. Because we want to contrast that with his wanting to find resources. Finding resources will work. You'd use NLP, we use brief therapy, Ericksonian work. There's a lot of different approaches we could use to add more resources. We could even develop a metaphor of you as a real successful miner and finding more resources. That's adding more resources to that moment. What we want to do is something different. We know how to do that one. What we want to do is find a time when you had an experience of going for a goal and nothing could stop you. You just went for it. You only have a couple of those, right?
Yeah, I can't even think of one.
You can't think of one?
Well, I guess one of my goals was to have a family.
Yeah.
And I finally got that. So
And you got that.
Nobody stopped me from doing
Nobody
that.
stopped you. All right. And that's a cooperative effort. You understand you can't do that one on your own. So nobody could stop you from that. That goal was so important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now the stopping, there's the metaphor, a block. So I want you to think about that for a moment, just about how that was really something you had as a desire to have a family. And you encountered things that slowed it down and so forth, but you still got there. And hold that idea in your mind and in your body, and then relive that experience of looking for resources, but hold the idea of nothing can stop you, and you know it because it happened. And go ahead and live that moment through and find out what happens. And take a breath and let it out slow. Breathing is not optional in this work.
There's a lot of things that could have stopped me from doing it.
But they didn't.
Well, I mean, it slowed me down, but it didn't stop me.
Okay. Now my question is, because what I asked you to do was to take the nothing could stop me from having a family, and take that through the experience of looking for resources and find out how is looking for resources different now. Okay, couple of things here. One is we could do this sitting down, but if you look at Gene, Gene is a physical kind of guy. And it just happens that some people are more in their bodies and more physical. Some people are more kind of observers on life. Of course, it's a continuum, but there are tendencies. If the person's more of an observer on life, they can do this stuff mentally very easily. If the person is more physical about life, they often find it much more useful to actually physically do it, which is why I set it up with the actual territory being real and the goal over there. And so if you would, if you'd be willing to play here just for a minute?
Okay.
We can just have you imagine your goal in your mind over there. Can't we do that?
Okay.
Okay. That goal's over there. You can imagine it some distance away.
Are you talking about my own personal goal or
Right,
the goal of having a family?
No, your personal goal.
Okay.
Good. So your personal goal's over there, and you have a sense that you need to look for resources along the way. Is that right? I'd like you to take a couple of steps here thinking about how you want to get to that goal, and you need to look for resources. Just so you kind of bring that up to your mind. Yeah, just live it here for a moment. Okay. And then give it a pause. And step out over here. Step off to the side. And then we're going to go back ahead of this, back here. And now what I'd like you to do is to get into your mind that idea that you want a family and nothing could stop you. And that was the importance that it had for you. It may have been slowed down, but you knew that that was going to happen, and you have proof because it did. And it's not so much the family we're concerned about, but that sense, that feeling, that idea that nothing could stop you. And with that feeling in mind, walk through the same space toward that goal.
Oh, wow.
There we go, see? This is where sometimes talk it makes a real difference, whereas I say, he's physical, so that made a difference for you. Yeah, come on back here.
Okay.
And just look at this now, and what's your sense of it?
It was a lot easier the second time than it was the first time.
And what's your sense now as you even imagine going for that goal in your mind?
Well, it's like I didn't even think about it the second time, whereas the first time, that's all I did was think about it.
Right, and what about now?
Now it's easier. I know what my resources are.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain, really.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming up and playing. Okay. That's the difference it makes between thinking about it and doing it, and that was really nice of you to say. It's like, wow, it's hard to explain. It just happens. So what we're doing is we're taking one experience that has a metaphoric code, in your case, looking for resources, and we're taking another metaphoric code called nothing can stop me, and we're re-experiencing it, and we're recoding that whole experience to it's different now. So when he thinks about it, he's going to get the new experience. So that's the exercise. And I would say groups of 2 or 3. The 2 will facilitate it and just get moving on it. The value of 3 would begin to get more metaphors, more different realizations that people do this really different ways. That just because you've always been dashed on the rocks, or life was a problem, or you had to find the solution, or you couldn't get focused, or whatever it is, doesn't mean everybody else did that. It's like if you look around the room, you see that everybody's dressed differently and we look differently. It's like, how would we think that everyone would have the same ideas about the way the world works? It's all right, we all do. But that's one of the joys about finding how other people do it, because every one of their ways of doing it that looks like a problem to them, if it's not yours, it's a resource. You see, I just added a new one to my list. Now I've got looking for resources. That's another way of coding experience that I didn't have before, and if I run that one through my experience, then I have that much more flexibility, not consciously deciding how to do it, but unconsciously letting my mind decide which way to do it is most appropriate. Ready to go? Okay, let's do an exercise. We'll take about 20 minutes with this, groups of 2 or 3. So, any immediate comments or questions? Yeah.
I'm curious on your languaging, because you seem, especially say with Gene, to be getting into the area of beliefs. And I noticed that the traditional neuro-linguistic framing of the question would be, think of a time when someone tried to hold you back. But that's not the way you phrased it, and I suspect that there was a reason that you might have been doing it that.
Yeah, the idea that when you're going for the different metaphor, the metaphor that they do easily, that is, you want a time when they got the experience of it, whether it was being held back or somebody tried to talk them out of something, or they were off track, or they were stuck, but it was an experience where they had it and boom, they were right back on track, or they were began to move again, or they were focused immediately. So it's a sense in which where the metaphor worked easily, and it worked so easily they didn't notice it. This is the curious thing about the brain. What are we going to focus on? We're going to focus on the form that doesn't work. I have to get more resources, for example, or I have to get unstuck. One of the things that's amused me is that among the more famous presenters, say you mentioned neuro-linguistic programming, is for years in neuro-linguistic programming, I was doing exercises about getting unstuck. We had stuck states and we had resource states. Now, I don't really get stuck. Stuck is not my favorite state. My favorite way of thinking about it is I'm behind. I am so far behind, in the words of Kelvin and Hobbes, I'm going to live forever. My mother said of me years ago that I will be late for my own funeral, and I said, something good to be late for. That was the one I would go to. Now, what did I want to do? I wanted to get ahead, and I would work and work and work and work and work. I'd almost, and then I'd fall behind again. So I'm looking at this stuff with stuck states, and I began to wonder about it. And then I realized Richard Bandler, and principal co-founder there, now he's into propulsion systems. Whose metaphor are we talking about? Or Anthony Robbins, well known for his power walking, his walk across hot coals and breaking through boards and getting a breakthrough in your life. And the thing is, actually, I identified with that more than I did with the stuck states. But as I said, I didn't identify with breaking through a relationship. Breaking through a person didn't fit for me. It wasn't something that made sense for me. And you think about it, is the people that come to those seminars, and other seminars as well, if the metaphor is a mismatch, if it's a mismatch for the way they do things, that can be a very enriching and liberating experience. If the person hasn't had the experience of breakthrough, it's the same thing that we were doing here with Gene and with Jeannie and with other people, is we were offering them a way to recode their experience in a way they didn't have it. That's the underlying structure. But if somebody has walked on hot coals a dozen times or broken dozens of boards, they've learned that metaphor. They know it thoroughly. And what they'll do is then try to add more resources to make it work instead of going, wait a minute, is it appropriate? Do I need to jump through hoops? Do I need to look for resources? Or do I just need to look at my map, get focused, and get moving? It's a different use of that principle. Did a number of you find that this was fun?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Sort of the fun way to do things. Did any of you have the experience that John had, that you needed to do a number of different metaphors before you got to a transformation of it? Because that's also sometimes the case, is that the very first choice you kind of do is going, well, it's pretty much the same. And in John's case, he had the idea of a block, a gap that he had, and it was in other people's control. So it was persons, and it was also a block. And we looked at adding in different things, a sense of irresistibly going for something, and nothing could stop him, so nothing could hold him back. And then I also looked at, I said, well, why not go around? Why do you have to go? He said, well, I have to go way around. So I said, well, better to go way around than not at all. And then we had him run around. Well, it's like if you take a highway, it may go out of the way, but a super highway will get you there. Even if it's a longer distance, you can get there faster because you can go faster. And then we suggested jumping. And what then he came up with, and this is where I talk about the elegance of your unconscious minds. He came up with, he says, well, I'm going to need to get another vehicle. I didn't even suggest a vehicle, but by loosening up his thinking, about assisting him in finding new ways to think about it and code that, then he was able to come up in his own creativity with new possibilities. That's when I think this stuff becomes generative.
It was fun for me to try some things that I had never done before. And it felt a little uncomfortable, but it was it was very liberating to do something that was sort of outside of my repertoire.
And now inside your repertoire. Yeah. Okay. I'll give you a few minutes here to catch up and ask some questions. But before I allow you to do that, I want you to notice what I just did, because that's what people do all the time. Since I still sort a lot of things through being behind or being on time or being ahead, of course, what am I going to be concerned about for other people? That they get to have time to catch up. Not that everybody has my metaphor, which of course they must, because I have it. In other words, our own experience of the world is seamless. If we're so concerned about that, how could other people not be concerned about that? So you may find in business situations or personal situations that someone will say, you know, wow, that's really great, that's a real challenge. You know, or someone else will talk about, we need to get going here. We've been sitting around too long, we need to get going. And you'll be going, we're going just fine. But they're inside of their metaphor, and they're going to even express concerns for you. They come and go, do you think this is going too slowly? Or they might come up and go, I think we're really getting like bogged down by this. Or what we really need here is a breakthrough. And of course what they're going to offer is a solution out of their metaphor that they're using, as each of us will do as well. So it becomes kind of an interesting experience to notice yourself doing that and begin to notice when other people are endeavoring to be helpful, that they're going to try to be helpful using their way of organizing experience. So, even having said that, we'll give you a moment to catch up. Dan.
One question I have is how you handle objections that come up between the old metaphor that has worked, particularly if it's worked well, and the new one which doesn't necessarily feel as comfortable at times. So you may have some objection to using that metaphor because you're not sure whether it'll work or not.
I was curious about that because if you take another moment out of the person's life when they really do have that other experience, like Jean had that other experience, like Jeannie had that other experience, that there isn't the objection in doing it. Usually the objection is ahead of time. The objection that most people have is they want to figure it out before they do it. And really it's a matter of getting people to just go in and do the Nike slogan. To be willing to take two experiences that they know well. In other words, it's not like, how would this work? It's, you know the experience of not getting where you want to go in this situation, and you know the experience of having gotten there easily in another one. And getting them to just do that, try it out. And given the shortness of what's required to do the process, is I put my energy into, well, let's just try it. Let's take 1 minute and try it, and then we can answer your questions a lot better then. This would be a good time for us to go into what are the different kinds of changes that we've been working with. To summarize where we've been, the first time when we used the barrier, we were looking at choices within the metaphor. That is that if you think of your experience as having a barrier, then you have choices about how you relate to it. You can break through it, you can go under it, you can go around it, you can disassemble it. You can have other people have moved the mountain to you instead of going to the mountain. But all of those stay within that metaphor. So it's developing with Tom, what we did is more choices within that particular metaphor. Then after we had seen that, I said, well, I tricked you in the sense that all of us are led by other people, by media, by our past experience, to go into those few metaphors that we use a lot rather than the many that we use a little. To say it again, there are many choices of metaphor. There's a few that we become accustomed to using a lot. We get used to them, and then we make them work even when they don't. We add more resources for them. We strengthen them. We add more resources to them. We supercharge them, and they work. We get them to keep working at higher and higher levels. But actually, there's a whole world of choices that we're not paying attention to, all the different other types that we could. And that's when we did the second form, where we explore alternative metaphors. Where the person has one appreciation of a situation, whether it's being unleashed, or whether it's finding resources, or some other form, and instead of giving them alternative ways within it, we give them a completely different metaphor to run through that experience. Jean.
So you're saying find more metaphors, because what I think is I'm using too much energy in one.
Yes.
And eventually I get burned out on that one.
Yeah, it reaches a level where you've made it work as much as it can. And yet you know that you have many, many other ways that you've done things, but you didn't put energy into developing those. And it doesn't matter which one of these you've picked, whether it's blocks and gaps, and you really know how to get around blocks and gaps, or whether it's burdens and how to deal with the different burdens in life, and they have to carry things and being buried and overwhelmed. And you've developed all these different resources and strategies, whether it's time management or states of excellence or personal power, whatever those are. You've developed all these ways of working with those. You've stayed within that one. That's one kind of way to work with it. And that's what we did at first with the block. Another way is, if you're using a lot of this one, go and find moments of success in which you've used these other ones. So use the one where you had a lot of energy and it just carried you through. Or use the one where you were unfocused and then got back on track. Or use the one where you shortened the distance. You found a shortcut to your goal. And bring that into the situation, so instead of thinking it as a burden or as a block, it's not even considered that way. It's become a whole new thing. Now, one way it becomes a new thing is that it becomes the other category you moved it to. But another way, as John demonstrated, is that he said, I need a new vehicle. We didn't even suggest that metaphor. His mind came up with it. Once he was free of concentrating on one of these, his mind could begin to generate, I got lots of different ways to do this. And as I said, of some of the peak performance things like breaking through boards, if somebody hasn't experienced breakthrough in their life, that's a new metaphor for them. They are expanding their repertoire. But if somebody's really good at breaking through boards and breaking through things, then they want to develop another choice, another possibility, and more, and more, and more. Jeannie.
So how does the new possibility that you've tried on, and how do you deal with that so that that doesn't become one that you get stuck in or that you do again and again?
I think that's a matter of, when do you find that you're going outside to get like heroic measures to make something work inside? My own words for this is the ultimate technique. As soon as you're trying to find the ultimate technique that will help you remove all barriers, all momentum problems, burdens, and get you through, you know then for sure it's time to look for other metaphors. The idea is not one ultimate technique,
Right.
but a diversity of possibilities.
Well, and that's really what I'm asking, is how do you end up having more choice? I mean, if the mind likes to do the one that works, it seems that you would then do the new one that worked
Right.
again and again.
And if it
again.
works easily, you keep doing it. But if you find that you get bogged down or slowed down or stuck or any of those, instead of trying to make that work, it's time, that can be an alert, a signal, it's time to change the way we're doing it.
Yeah.
How do you remember to use this resource in the future? Well, the idea is, because you're actually running it through an existing experience, that any time the brain would have gone to that moment, it will now go to it as a changed experience. In other words, the change, the appearance of the change later on is automatic.
I was concerned because, of course, much like, neuro-linguistic anchors, you have environments, contexts where people use a recurring metaphor. So if you've got a new metaphor for your business experience, but you go back to the office and everybody's using the warfare metaphor, that would be one of my concerns, or at least questions.
How do these metaphors interact with each other?
Right.
And the answer is not easy to give, and if I gave a straight-ahead easy answer, it would be a lie. It's rather that these are highly interactive systems, and it's very surprising what a shift will bring. If you come into an organization and you begin to speak differently, and importantly, effectively, you understand every demonstration we've done so far, the people have gone, wow, it's easier, it's freer, I can just do this. That's a reorganization at a higher level. That you come in with that reorganization, in a sense, it's like the experience of perfect pitch. If you've ever heard about this in choirs, if you get a choir of people and somebody in the group has a perfect pitch voice, the rest of the group will unconsciously begin to move to that voice. They won't even notice. They'll all start going, that's the one that's right on the note. And I think that there's that kind of a possibility that change can take place in marvelous ways. The business metaphors of business as a machine and business as a war, I mean, a number of us thought those were so entrenched that, you know, we'd never be able to stop the machine from running. And yet, you've got Charles Garfield and Tom Peters and other people are now talking about the metaphors in business. And this is not, I mean, straight ahead in their books like Second to None and Crazy Times Demand Crazy Organizations, that this is becoming front page kinds of stuff in business. And how is that possible? Because the people that can do that have more choices and they begin to become the successful model. So, we can do choices within a metaphor. We can explore alternative metaphors for the situation. I'd like to introduce a third possibility, and that is altering the inner land itself. Years ago, I was involved in a form of psychotherapy that would sometimes have this kind of fun. They'd say, how far are you from succeeding? Show me by putting your fingers apart. Is it an inch? Is it a half inch? How far away is success? And the person would show you about that far, and then we'd reach out and we'd go, we'd close the fingers. And sometimes smoke would come out of people's ears. They go, whoa. And they would get a substantial shift. Other times they didn't. Well, we thought it was very cool. But it wasn't until I began to think about the metaphors that I got the idea that what we were doing was playing with what? The distance between where they were now and where they wanted to go. And if you artificially close that gap, and the person really resonated, they were in touch with that distance and experienced it, it was possible, just like I did with Tom when I nudged him closer than he had planned to be, that for a moment he went, well, yeah, I could get comfortable with this. And so, another way to look at this is out of the old Greek quote that man is the measure of all things. Of course it was man, it was that time. I would alter the quote to say man and woman's world is the measure of all things, or their inner land is the measure of all things. That is, that we have this inner world, this inner landscape where we're measuring everything, where everything is in relationship to something else. And there's a very big metaphor that operates in this world, and that's the metaphor of scale. After all, how is something a molehill or a barrier or a mountain? How would you know if the terrain was uphill or downhill? Relative to what? It's all scaled relative to its opposite. If something is dark, it's dark relative to what? To lightness. If something is deep, it's relative to how high it could be. If something is near or far, those are relative to each other. A number of us can still remember back when we were kids and Christmas seemed so far away. It was July. Christmas was never going to come. It was an eternity. And now we're going, oh, they're putting up those Christmas ornaments again. Is it that time already? Jeez. And it's that sense of scale when you've only had a few Christmases. You've only had 4 or 5 or 6 of them. There's not very many to compare to. And time can seem really far apart. When you've had a number of experiences, you've been around a few years, you start thinking, yeah, this is going to take a couple of years, this project. It'll be worth it. If you told that to a 16-year-old and says, well, this will take a couple of years, he's going, a couple years? I don't have that much time, I'm young. So, the metaphor of scale and comparison. For instance, how far or near is the goal, the desire that you have in mind? What happens if you close that distance? What happens if you scale a comparison? You go, oh, my goal is so far away, and you go relative to the next 6 months or the next decade. How much distance are you going to travel in your life in the next decade compared to getting to this one desire? You may say, oh, it's not very much time at all. In other words, a scale difference. the direction of being on track and off track. The classic story of the Apollo astronauts on their way to the moon, and they were on track how much of the time? Very little bit. 3% of the time, the Apollo spacecrafts were where they were supposed to be. Or to say 97% of the time, they were where they weren't supposed to be. But then they'd get back to where they were supposed to be, and then they'd go beyond that, and they'd come back the other way. So the idea of scale, what does it mean to be on track and off track? If you were off track 97% of the time, would you want to go to the moon? But if you're only a little off track, and you're constantly measuring getting back on track, the momentum, how quickly you're going, relative to what? Sometimes people want to learn something really fast. Super fast learning, ultra fast learning. Haven't you found sometimes that when you did something slowly, you really learned it thoroughly, and you never had to go back and do it again because it was right? It was in your bones. And so this idea of how quickly or how slowly we do something can make a tremendous difference. And on down the rest of these. Blocks. How big or small a block is, how big or small a gap is, and relative to what? The terrain, how uphill or downhill. The burdens, these are not covered as often, but we have the pressed. Right? The pressed, you know those? The impressed, the depressed, the suppressed, and the repressed. This is an interesting category because what happened is the burdens got taken into psychoanalysis and psychopharmacology. Somebody doesn't have a metaphor, they're actually depressed. Who's depressing them? Hear these words that people are using. Or to be smothered or buried. Persons and personifications, being held back, being trapped, being wasted. Now, as you look down this list and the examples I've given, here's the thing. People act like their inner worlds are real. I want to give you a demonstration of that right now. And I'm going to do it within a limited metaphor. I'd like you to think of a difficulty in your life, a problem, a difficulty that you have. Just one that comes up for you. It doesn't matter which one it is, but one that is significant for you, one that's real for you. And I'd like you to think of it right now. And I'm going to ask a strange question, and you're going to be able to answer it. What are its dimensions? That is, how big or small is it? How close or far away? How high or low is it? And letting go of that a second, I'd like you to think of the resources that you have to work with, to whatever it is you want to do with that difficulty. What resources do you have that you're bringing to the solution of that difficulty, to the resolution of it, to the change of it? And I'd like you to notice the dimension of your resources, the dimensions of your resources. And now I'd like you to bring those two into the same mental landscape and notice which is bigger or smaller, which is closer or farther away, which is higher or lower on the horizon. Now do you understand why it's a problem? Did a number of you find that the difficulty is bigger than the resources? It's like, ooh, what a surprise. And is the difficulty closer or farther away?
Closer.
And is it higher or lower?
Same.
Higher.
Okay. Just to notice this. Now, one more question. Where are you? There's a sense sometimes people have of they're here and here's the difficulty, sort of looming over them, and then here's these puny resources over here. But how big are they relative to the resources, relative to the difficulty? What is your size relative to the other two? Now let's play with this a little bit. What happens in your mind's eye if you just increase your size? Just allow your size to begin to increase larger and larger, so those, even the resources and the difficulty begin to sort of be down there, little blocks or something. How does that change it? Do you begin to feel differently? Let yourself go back to the size that you were, and this time begin to sense either you or those two senses of the resources and the difficulties, begin to make distance between the two of you, so that you are some distance away and the resources and difficulty are a distance away. How does that make it different? Bring yourself back in so you're where you were at the very beginning, and try out the following. Whatever the positions are, have the difficulty begin to move and become lower and lower in your visual field, and have the resource begin to become higher. Just physically allow one to sink down and the resource to move up. So make some changes there. Now, if you really want to, you can put it back the way it was, or you can leave it in one of the forms that you enjoyed it more. As I point out a couple of metaphors that aren't being as noticed as much. One of them is more is up. That is, when you pile something up, if we were to pile up chairs or money or anything, as you begin to get more of it, you get a higher stack. So more is up and down is less. So something is more important. And you hear people say this in their language. They say, well, let's address our high-level values, because up is high is more important. There's also a parent-child metaphor that goes here. All of us started out as a child, at least everybody I've ever met, and children are smaller than parents, so they were used to looking up. Authority was up, and subordination is down. So if you're in charge, you're up. If you're not in charge, you're physically down. It's spatially. And that if something is closer, it's more important in your experience. After all, you want to take care of the immediate future, not something 10 years out, as we say in language. Or that was a long time ago. You don't need to be concerned about. But yesterday, still got to be concerned about yesterday, because those are closer. Yesterday's closer than a distant memory. Tomorrow is closer than 10 years from now. So closer is more important. So we have that distance and size, which comes into it. I used to do a lot of work in decision with people, and I found it fascinating that people would have an ordinary decision strategy. They could go in, buy anything. But if it was a big decision, well, then they suddenly would get upset and they'd start yelling at themselves in their head, this is a big decision, don't blow it. That was about the only difference I found. Is if the person made what the decision was about a big picture and held it over themselves so that it could overwhelm them, then they could begin to use their internal dialogue and start talking to themselves in unuseful ways. But if they lowered it down and made it smaller till they could handle it, in other words, hold the difficulty or the decision in their hand, then it became easy. Of course, people go, but it is a big decision. And I'm going, if it's so big and important, why would you make it that way in your brain so you couldn't make a good one? What we're working with here is the difference between the outside and the inside world. I'm not one of these people that recommends taking your difficulties and sending them into the heart of the sun where they burn up and you never see them again, because the next day when you see that boss or that person, you go, who are you? This is the idea of putting things in scale rather than eliminating them, rescaling things. The idea is that your sense of your resources may be smaller than your difficulty. But let me point out something very significant. How big would the problem in your mind be if you weren't there? Most people have, I'm a little small thing and I got this big problem and I got a few little resources. But I go, look, we pull you out of the equation completely. You never existed. We'll do those wonderful life movies, and you didn't happen. How big would the problem be? Most people respond to me saying, if I wasn't there, there wouldn't be a problem. So at that point I said, so you're at least as big as the problem. And since that problem or that difficulty is only one part of your life, the likelihood is actually you're a lot bigger than it is. Because it's only about work, some particular project, or some particular home relationship or something. It's only even one aspect of you. So the difficulty is smaller than you are. It has to be. It couldn't be there without you. And then you go to the next step. What would happen if you just in your mind's eye right now increase the size of the resources? You don't even know what's in them. Just begin to increase them and make them more richly colored and more solid and real. And maybe even begin to raise them up on the horizon, make them a little higher. And you can, if you want, shrink down the difficulty even more and lower it down some. How does that change your ability to work with it, to do something with it? Because that's really the point here. The difficulty, I'm assuming, has a reality in the outer world. But my point is, why does it need to be of any other size or dimension than allows you to do something with it? On this tape, we're going to continue to explore the world of scale. Scale is one of those things that's incredibly important and people almost never realize it. Take this example. If you were to go to lunch, and you will at some point, you'd know where you'd want to go, you'd know what you wanted to have, and you'd know if they delivered you what you wanted. In other words, in terms of what we want when we want lunch, life is easy and life is clear. However, if you move up to love or to life, this increased scale often throws people off, and then they don't know how to use their strategies, their thoughts, the skills they've always had. So we're going to explore in more detail the different aspects of scale, up and down, close and far, small and large, the distinctiveness of our inner worlds. Then we're going to compare metaphors. For different metaphors will get you truly different results. That growing and journey and winning, for example, are profoundly different worlds. Which world you live in most is your current world within a word. And what worlds would you like to try on to create new and different opportunities for yourself? Finally, I'll talk to you about the limits of understanding. For it's in living these experiences that we truly change, and there is no one possibility, but worlds upon worlds. So, reactions, responses.
I got the sense of one of those optical illusion places that you see in museums where it's a room, and there are two figures that are the same size but they look different sizes, and then you go to a different viewpoint literally on these exhibits, and you notice that it's the room that's kind of skewed, and the as the things change position, they change relative size a lot, and that's exactly what happened with my difficulty and my resources. I just moved to a different peephole and they were totally different.
That's a one. You know that one, that experiment where they have the little girl and the basketball player, and they're actually in this physical room, and the basketball player, little girl is like 12 feet tall, and the basketball player going, whoo, like that, and then they switch places and it goes the other way. That's really nice. That's what people are doing inside. They just didn't realize that. They assumed, well, it's a big problem, it's got to be bigger than me. Wrong. It's smaller than you. You're bigger. And then resources, what would be the relative resources? Why not make them bigger? Now, I did this visually, but it's really the sense of it. It doesn't matter whether you do it visual or with words. And people have done this with the feeling they have about the resources and allowing the resources to expand. But it's the idea, if we go specifically here to the different types of difficulties and desires, it's about beginning to play with stuff like, why not? like pushing the fingers together, why not make the distance really small in your mind? After all, people who are strategic planners will put 30 years in a visualization only a couple of feet in front of them. I mean, if it went out into the next state, they wouldn't be able to keep track of it. It's our minds, we can do that. And in terms of the direction, why not put ourselves on the path? In terms of momentum, we could have the feeling that we're going along well. Even if it's slow, we could have the feeling we're moving. We could notice what's moving. Blocks and gaps, of course, are the most obvious thing. It's the mountain and molehill effect. It's like, well, what if you made the mountain smaller? What if you raised up and flew over it? People go, but that's not real. And I'm pointing out it wasn't real in the first place. It's just the way you got it. But because it seems like a real inner landscape, it seems like a real problem. Terrain, the idea of a rough and smooth terrain, of being up or down as qualities. And again, up relative to what down? Could be nice hike up. Could be you could smooth it out. I worked with a gentleman that had a winding trip through a forest that was all dark and awful, but once we added other little places along the way, we added little villages and people along there, then it became a really nice walk in the woods. A trail that led from one city to another. This is the kind of transforming the actual quality of their inner land. The burdens, you could have the person put the burdens down. You could have them make them smaller. Or they could float and carry them along like balloons. It's the quality of the inner mind that people haven't played with as much. People have felt this insistence on a correspondence between the external world and the internal world. Having it is useful, but only as long as it is useful. Persons and personalizations. I'll tell you my inspiration for this, just so that you know the kind of magazines that I used to read. I got this idea from Mad. When people would say they have a bad attitude, and they'd have that cartoon in Mad magazine where this guy would carrying this thing behind him on a leash, and it'd be this monster kind of, you know, and that would be the bad attitude. Or he's holding a grudge, and they'd have this person holding this monstrous-looking thing that was a grudge. Well, I've started to do this with people. It really changes it. And if you take one step further, when someone uses words like have, like I have, like they possess it, they go, I have depression. And I go, how big is that sucker? Does it float? Even if you don't say this aloud, it allows you to detach from the idea that these things are real. And in fact, their ideas, their concepts the person has, they're real in their inner land. But understand it's the person, including us, each of us, that's making them real. And if we begin to think about that being a malleable, changeable inner world, it becomes a real different experience. Finally, the issue of energy. People saying, well, I'm just low on energy. You say, well, you know, it's just come over here and we'll fill it up again. They might look at you funny, but then again they go, you're right, I feel more full. Or something I've done, and I have a health program I'm working with. I've noticed that like people who have difficulty with weight and food very often experience their stomachs as slightly outside their body. And that what I'll do with the person in terms of energy and stuff is help them move that sense back inside their body. And the person begins to feel more energized and more centered from that. I'm going, this is an act of imagination. And what I'm discovering in this work is it's all an active imagination. Most of us have very active imaginations. We just don't happen to be using them for our own outcomes and our own goals and desires. They kind of like got started and we're in the movie going, whoa, I hope it turns out okay. When in fact we're the ones that can rewrite it, rescript it, and take it to new places. So what I'm going to invite you to do now is the following exercise. What I'm going to have you do now is write down a difficulty. That is something in your life that's a difficulty or a problem for you. And take a moment right now and write that down. Just one line about it, just as unconsciously as you can now with the awarenesses you've gotten so far in this seminar. Just as easily as you can, just write it down quick. Whatever comes into your head will be right. It's your brain. It's your experience. It's your imagination. And then to have you read out this difficulty to 2 other people. I want you to partner on this, have some fun. And have the other people begin to suggest changes in terms of scale. That is, this is going to be a practice in rescaling the inner land. This is another way of working with the worlds within a word, is to find the metaphors or metaphor in that phrase. And then once you get a sense of it, using, if you like, the different types of difficulties and desires, but more importantly is to begin to think about everything is relative to something else. If somebody says they have a big problem, you go, is it as big as the Empire State Building? Or is it bigger than a breadbox? Smaller than Arkansas? You can have fun with them that way, or you can seriously say, well, what if you made that smaller? Or how big are you relative to that? And begin to work with rescaling it and rescaling the resources the person has in the situation. Understand, you are not solving their problem. You're simply creating an opportunity where their own resourcefulness and skills and creativity will be able to come forth. Think of it this way. If we really think of mental space, and you have a problem that, say, occupies 30 square feet of the room you're in, how much room do you have for your resources? But if you shrink it down to like a Rubik's Cube size thing, you know, 3 inches by 3 inches by 3 inches, then you've got a lot more open space to put resources in. Not only that, it seems a lot easier to handle. Now, if it doesn't happen to be a thing, if it happens to be somewhere they want to go, well, then you're playing with the distance. If it seems to be that they're not getting somewhere fast enough, then you begin to play with the idea of momentum. But of course, a momentum is connected to distance. If you shorten the distance, it doesn't matter how fast you go. If you make that a short enough distance, you just go, boop, and you're there. So this is where I would allow your creativity to flow forth, to just see how much fun you can have helping the person to develop new ways of doing this. Got the idea? Ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, go to it. Groups of 3 will take about 30 minutes, about 10 minutes around. Pause the tape now to take as much time as you'd like. In terms of the scale of experience, everything in our inner land, our inner map, our inner territory, our landscape, has a scale relative to something else. Whether it's an ant to an antelope, whether it's a difficulty to a desire, whether it's a present to a wide open future, whether it's a long past to a small future. Some people think that happens when they're older, to someone having a sense their past is short and their future is wide open. All of these scales exist unconsciously in people's experience. And the variables to pay attention to in this exercise particularly, when you're rescaling, is the size of the difficulty, the size of the desire, and the size of the self, of the person relative to those two. Now keep in mind, no matter how much they get involved in the content and talk to you about how that's really the way it is really the way it is in that person's mind, even if it's your own. And so it will become much easier to simply think of these as objects that you can change the sizes of, or the distances of, or the heights of, and just allow that to happen. In fact, linguistically, it often is easier if you go, I wonder what would happen if you found yourself like 10, 20 feet taller than that. And using that kind of a language will invite the person to have that experience. Or, well, if you saw that really far away, how small is it? And of course, you've watched me up here joking and having fun with it, is once you realize you can move it, you can have fun with the person. It isn't that you aren't taking the difficulty seriously. It's rather you're not taking seriously their seriousness about not being able to handle it. You take them seriously enough to have fun with the difficulty to the point where you're going, they go, well, it sounds like you're making fun of this. And you said, and I'll continue to until we've got it to where you can have fun with it and you can really change it and have it make a life that you want. Life is filled with great difficulties. If you weren't alive, you wouldn't have these problems. On the other hand, Well, this is from one of my favorite pulp novels, the Illuminati trilogy. There was this young man, and he goes through all these experiences, and he's kidnapped and broken out of jail, and all these things happen, and he comes before the Grand Poobah of this secret organization, and he turns to him and goes, "Why are all these things happening to me?" And the Grand Poobah, Hagbard Celine, turns to him and says, "Because you're alive. Something has to happen to you." I think people forget that sometimes. We're alive. Something has to happen to us. And so it's a sense of, can we handle it? Can we do something with it? And I look at that word, I listen to that word, handle, and I really grasp it in a new way. The idea of it really being something that you can do something with. So, the variables in terms of their experience are up and down. When something's up, more authority. When it's down, less authority. Something's closer is more important. Something's farther away gets smaller, less important. Also, sense of more distant in time. Something's bigger or smaller, obvious differences as in a parent and a child. If you just allow yourself to play with these variables, you'll find that the person's experience begins to change. And if they go, well, but it's not that way, you can always go, well, let's just try it out for a few minutes that way. And of course, once they have tried it out, the principle of elegance in neurology will step in for you and go, this is better, we're going to leave it this way. And if they don't, then you can just try something else. So, in your exercise, in your experiences, what did you find? Yeah, Bruce.
I found myself looking for resources that I hadn't used before and finding them over there and then bringing them closer to me.
I like that way when Bruce gestures. They're over there. You know, they're waiting in the wings is what it looked like. Can we come out? Can we come out?
Exactly.
Yeah, good. John.
Well, I rediscovered something that I had done a long time ago and brought it back and started using it again, and it became very elegant, and it was just oh, I know how to do this. I really know how to do this. It was just there all of a sudden.
Okay. Now, I would add to that, even though I wasn't there for the experience, I go back to the example, if you've got a big difficulty, you simply don't have as much mental room to rediscover something. So the rescaling and the bringing something down to a smaller size and lower opens up a field of possibilities in which you can rediscover things and bring old ideas and resources into the fold or discover new ones that you'd like to use now. Did any of you have metaphoric fun with this? I'm going to mention one that I heard, and this is where instead of working with the rescaling as a principle in this kind of block-like way, as if it's building blocks, was one of the participants had the idea that she had to get her ducks in a row until the partner pointed out, ducks line up naturally. And you should have seen the look on this woman's face. She's like, they do? It's like, what am I going to do then? After all, I'd been chasing around trying to line up the ducks that would line up naturally. Now, what was nice was the metaphor was continued with, well, the ducks imprint on the mother, on the leader, and all you need to do is be there when they hatch and lead.
Oh, wow.
So once again, offering the possibility, instead of doing the old metaphoric behavior, chasing around after the ducks to line them up, the person is offered something else to do, which is consistent, working within the metaphor and yet developing it in a really nice way. Tom?
One of the things that happened was the issue or problem I had, no matter how big or small it got, it had the same intensity and density to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't get any lighter or easier. And so John and Leslie were working with me, and they said, why don't you chop it up? And it turned out by taking that issue and chopping it up, it was like chunking it down, and any one of those would be easy to deal with.
Very nice. My compliments to them. Did someone find that it didn't work? Yeah.
I wouldn't say that it didn't work, but it didn't work completely.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was, the metaphor we came to is that people were pulling me off track. And I still feel a thing, you know, it's like we got the tasks organized and they're straight and small and in a list, and that's cool, but I still had the sense of feeling pulled
Now,
off track.
when I heard that, I walked by the group and I heard that, and I immediately thought of like Star Trek and Captain, we're being pulled into the atmosphere. You know, it was like this idea of this attraction, like a gravitational force. And when I thought of that, I said, what makes something attractive if it's a gravitational force? It's got to be big. You're not going to have that experience with an asteroid. And so I suggested a smaller one, which I understand didn't quite have the effect you'd hoped for.
Yeah, it's like I can make this person smaller, and I still feel like I need to get over there, which takes me away from these things.
Let me use this example as a way to introduce another variable in scale, one that people don't notice as much, and that's distinctiveness. Have you ever noticed that you think more about the past than you do about the future? Do you ever wonder why? See, I get to sit in airports long periods of time, and I wonder about these things. Well, if you think about it, the past is more distinct than the future. You've got more to think about. The memories, you can go back to a memory that happened. If you go to a future possibility, it's usually kind of fuzzy, or you have like one real clear picture of that car or that sailboat or that vacation or whatever it is. Whereas if you got to the past, you've got whole movies going on. And here's a principle of scale in terms of how distinctive an experience is. If you want something to be more compelling, increase the distinctiveness of it. Make it more richly colored, more developed, more detailed, more full of different interactions and possibilities and details, just like reality is. And if you make it into a movie and extend that, it becomes even more real. If you look at it in terms of metaphors, this is the principle behind compelling futures. The idea in the positive mental attitude movement or the goal-setting movement is you set a goal and you write it down and you imagine it and you visualize it. All of those ideas are to do what? To make it so distinct that your brain will orient to it like it would, quote, a real memory, unquote. A way of thinking about that is, imagine up here we had a television screen, one of those big giant 4-foot or 8-foot by 8-foot screens, really crisp, clear color, with big speakers turned down that shake the floor. And over here we've got a little 1-inch by 1-inch little black and white color television, little 1-inch speaker. Now which one is going to get your attention? It's the relative distinctiveness of the two experiences. So in the case of making this person, this thing that's pulling you off track, you could make it smaller, you could make it farther away, you could move it down, but you could also make it pastel. You could make it more ghostly relative to the rest of your experience.
You know, what I thought of is I had this, when you were saying that, I had this thing of like lists over here. So I have words here and a human being here. And if I make these more representative as representing the trip that I'm taking and the people and so on, then...
And by the way, I would agree. Which is more important, people or words? It's the people that are more important. It's only through the people that you make a sale. It's only when you interact with people that you get things done in business. It's only with people that you can have intimacy. Words can conjure up images and memories, but they're not the same as connecting with someone, whether it's in a personal relationship or a business relationship. So the distinctiveness of what you wanted to keep you on track just couldn't compare. But when those lists of concepts become real experiences of individual people.
Like us.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wondered also in this situation, when you're talking about having a difficulty with a person, if you take it before you get to the person and what you're having difficulty with is some part of the interaction with the person. So, in other words, you're kind of in control of whatever it is you want to work on, your difficulty, rather than having the variable of a person, because you never really know how they're going to react. And work on that as your difficulty and the submodalities of that metaphor that you deal with in regards to your resource metaphor, how that shifts, and then having the resources, switching those resources, those submodalities, bringing that into then your interaction with the person.
A colleague of mine, Robert McDonald, puts it this way. He says, you have an argument with someone and you're walking home and you're having that argument with them all the way home, but they're not with you. He says, the problem is not them. It's some part in you that you're having the argument with now. And really, to work with that internally, he has found very often resolves difficulties externally. Because you think about it, you get into those internal arguments driving home, they're pretty much the same arguments or the same types of experiences. And it's really not the person. The person just happened to show up and filled the role for that particular way that you have relating to the world that you might want to have more choices about. Yeah, Jesse.
One that really, really worked well for me was momentum. As soon as we got into my momentum changing, it shifted all the, many of the others, so that I was really moving then.
All right.
So that was a real, that was a big shift on mine.
Let me follow on that one in the following way. There's another dimension to this that we can use, and that's the dimension of reactive and proactive. This is the idea of waiting to consider or acting immediately. The idea of passive and active, these ways that we relate to the environment. I'm going to put those two together for just a moment. Have you try out the following. In your mind, when you have yourself and then there's a desire that you want, do you move toward the desire, or does the desire move toward you, or both? For a lot of people, when they formulate their desires in their mind, it's like they have to move toward their desire. So I have to go do it all myself, kind of thing. Or there's a certain passivity in, I hope I win the lottery. I hope life turns out well. And they're like waiting for the desire to get to them. And they hope it stops there too and doesn't just drive by. And yet there's the additional possibility, which is in the New Testament. It's in the Quran. The idea that if you take a step towards God, God will take a step towards you. The idea that if we move towards something, it will also move toward us in equal measure. And is that a possibility that you're willing to entertain now? And what about the idea of attraction? What if your desires were irresistibly drawn toward you? Your desire saw you and went, I want that one. And you had that sense, not of something you were going and getting, but something that the closer you got to it, the more that it would come toward you, a sense of increasing attraction. These are qualities that I found in people that become very successful. Not by sludging effort, though you may have that at the beginning when your goal is so far from you, when your desire is so far from you. But as it gets closer, they get a sense of really participating with it to create the possibility and the opportunities for them. A sense of active interaction. And how about this as another possibility? Where is the edge of your inner world and what's beyond it? Does it just go on and on and on? Can you walk out to an edge and you don't know what's beyond it there? Some people like it different ways. Some people like their world. They want to know where everything is, everything put away in their world. They like to have their world defined. Other people are very attracted to the idea they don't know what's beyond that curtain. They don't know what's on the other side of that mountain. And this is just for you to consider, how are you doing it now? And what is it like, just for a few moments, to try on another possibility? Some of us are lucky enough when we're growing up, whether we traveled or we met somebody, we had a relationship, or we had an experience where our world just got opened up. It was just changed. We didn't know that possibility existed before. For me, one of those experiences was traveling to Japan. I met the aliens. They live on Earth. It's a completely different mindset. They wear suits just to fake us out and in business just to really make it work. But if you really stayed with them into the evenings or in the morning, talked to them and hung out with them, you discovered there was a whole different set of rules about how men and women related, how companies were formed, how agreements were made or broken. It was a whole different world. I was also lucky enough to have an uncle who was a writer and used to live in Paris. In fact, he and Ernest Hemingway liberated the Ritz Hotel's wine cellar. So, well, somebody had to do it. And that man introduced me to traveling through books and literature, of exploring new worlds. And that's really stayed with me. And I think I'm really a different person for it. And I only offer this as an analogy to your own experience. That you've either had places you've gone, people you've met, worlds open up for you. And I'm going, why not now? Even as you move through life, that there's what is beyond the edge of where you are now. could be incredible, especially if you imagine it that way. Within the territory, the mental lands that you live now, I'd like to begin to open up some of the metaphors. If we're moving from one place to another, if you're here and you're going there, whether it's away from where you are or toward another place or both, it has the quality of a journey. That is, you're going from one place to another, you're traveling through the world mentally and physically, seeing new places and people, maybe settling somewhere. That may be your destination, maybe one of several destinations. That's a very common and deep metaphor. The Odyssey being the Western version that comes down to us. There's another possibility that is outside of, but related to, this away from and toward. People don't often talk about it, but it's moving against something. That is, people can want to get away from where they are, get out of a bad environment where they grew up, or get out of a certain system or something. They can move toward success, they can move toward opportunity, toward new experiences. And yet people can also move against opposition, against injustice, against opponents. And this in itself forms another group, a metaphor, that shapes a lot of society. Because when you're moving against something, it may be a wall, but more often it's a person or a personalization. It becomes a contest, whether one person is going to win or not. It becomes a game. It very often has in people's lives the more serious form of don't do that, or I can't do that, or I won't do that. It very often has a negative associated with it when you find people living it, where they don't realize it's a game, but they're in conflict with somebody. I won't let you control my life or the life of my people. I can't do that. There's nothing I can do to stop them. I was alerted to this when I met someone who had the form, metaphorically, was that people would come and take things from her and she was powerless to stop them. How do you think this expressed itself? Distrust and preemptive strike. That is, it was seen as an adversarial relationship where one person would be the winner and one person wouldn't. And somebody had to step in early and do that. These create really different kinds of worlds. Because a journey can be towards something better and better. In the game, the better is the winning. Now, socially, we create games as also a way of defining our world. Whether it's football or baseball or hockey or the soccer game or card games, we get the experience of our mental landscape becomes very defined. We know the rules for it. And within those rules, people get to win in a limited amount of time, and they get to feel good about that. To me, it's a real basic human experience. And it's interesting to realize metaphorically that it's very different from someone who's on a journey going to some place desirable and arriving there, or simply going on this journey and exploring. Or going on a journey of discovery, trying to find that missing piece, that one bit of knowledge about life that'll let them finally put things together. That's another kind, and that's the story. That is, that some people don't think of life so much as a journey, but as a story that they're writing. Now I want you to consider a moment, I have the title of a famous psychoanalytic book here, Narrative Truth versus Historical Truth. That's a good question. The last time you told a dramatic story, whether it was about a breakup, or whether it was about a raise, or whether it was about a real new opportunity, did you include in that story all the times you went to the bathroom? Probably not. Did you include all the times you went to sleep and got up? In fact, if the truth be known, didn't you kind of shape that story a little bit so the telling was more dramatic, so that it became a better story? Even if it was tragic for you, you sort of really made it tragic. Or if it was a dramatic success, you made it a more dramatic success. And that is that the storytelling becomes more important than the actual facts that people have. Why should this matter? Because this is yet another way that people organize themselves, and this is understanding or knowing. By telling themselves a story, whether it's the story of literature or the story of history, story of science, people try to understand their experience. And we develop from that really different ways that people move through the world. Very different worlds they live in. After all, sailing and journeying through life is going to be very different than winning in life. Is going to be very different from trying to find the one true story. Which of course is
Our own.
Jesse says our own, but many people look for that story outside of themselves. They look for it in religion. These religions in the Western world or Eastern religions. Literature was really an attempt of human beings to understand the world they lived in. And although we're all too young to remember, when history became science with Karl Marx, the real fear that Dwight Eisenhower and Kennedy and those people had back then was that according to Marxian theory, Marxism would inevitably win. History was on their side. That history formed this natural flow to an inevitable place. Of course, now we know that ends in capitalism. Because that's the people who are in charge of writing the story of history now. Just like the history of science, the story of science is the story of uncovering truth. And boy, did that become a mess when Thomas Kuhn in the 1960s pointed out that each civilization had its science, which was true for that civilization. Niels Bohr and the atom, and they'd have the protons and the neutrons are in the center and electrons are on the outside. And they swing around real fast like a solar system. And if you put two of them close together, they'll hold together and you can make plastic. That was the theory. It worked. We used saran wrap earlier today and it worked. The thing was, a few years later, with more research, they discovered that they didn't really look like that. Actually, atoms, they think, look more like raisin pudding. And they didn't make Niels Bohr give back his Nobel Prize. But the science changed. And so all descriptions, whether they're literary or historical or scientific or personal, anytime we're trying to explain ourselves to somebody else, we're trying to understand. We're trying to know something about the world. And the people that want to do that, the people that are living a story, not all the time, but more time than they're doing the other patterns. The people that are doing that is quite different from someone who is playing a game where they're out to win. And he who dies with the biggest computer company in history wins the robber baron prize of this generation. And other games as well. Whether they're the ones on the gridiron or whether they're the ones played in corporate boardrooms. And that's different from someone who's taking a journey. And that's different from someone who's growing things. And so each of these metaphors leads to very different worlds that people would live in. And what I'd like to invite you to consider is, what would it be like if you occupied one of those other worlds even for a little while? Because just like if you try on different metaphors, you get more choices, you get more possibilities. If you try on different worlds, if you were in a world where there were winners and losers, at least today, for today's game, how different would that be from the story that you might be telling yourself now? Or if you're on a journey in life, or if you're growing things in life, how different would that be from having a story about it? Gina?
Is it possible, like in journey or sailing, that you could also incorporate winning?
We can, and what prompted me to take this particular direction, what prompted me to bring this into Worlds Within a Word, is that people who are very interested in playing games and winning and doing that They look over at the people who are on a journey or are growing things, and they go, non-competitive chumps. And the people over here who are like on a journey or are trying to know and learn, they look at the people who are playing the games and go, look at all that pointless activity. I mean, what are they wasting their time on? And yet to me, each of these represents a very different way of relating to your mental landscape. The journey is to travel through your land and discover it and discover how the outer world and your inner land relate. A game is simply to define the land and the rules with others for a period of time, whether it's chess or whether it's hockey, and then in that situation to play and develop skills. Even otters play. And that's different from wanting to know and to learn and understand the world, which is really trying to find out what story most agrees with you. Most people got it as which story is the one true story, but really it's which story most agrees with you. And so by all these words, I'm encouraging you to consider which world do you live in most? And what would it be like to try on another one? Some people have already started to combine them. But even then it would be very different, wouldn't it, Gina, if you were to tell the story of competitive sailing than it would be a competitive sailor, than it would be to be sailing the Aegean Sea. Questions about this? Yeah, Don.
How, you gave us the example of the people who are playing a game and how they would view the people who are on a journey. What about the other combinations, journey with story and vice versa? What would that be?
Well, again, these are overgeneralizations, but somebody who is on a journey in life, life is an adventure. Life is a challenge. They're out there experiencing it. They don't care about winning or losing some little game. You may get run over by a bus next week. Live each day as if it's your last, because one day you'll be right. And living like that, they could look at the people trying to tell the story and they go, look, any story will do. Get out and live life. Get out of the library.
Get away.
And yet some people do the library thing out in the world. They're translating hieroglyphics and reliving old civilizations. I mean, that's Indiana Jones put those two together in a way most people found irresistible. And the idea of growing things, and people see the growing things versus the game, and they see, in a sense, a denial of experience. Because as the seasons change, things grow and blossom and send forth seeds and then die off, and then the seasons change. And these people are worried about who's going to be in the Final Four. Who will care in 100 years? Who was the quarterback of the winning team of the 17th Super Bowl? Some people might be able to tell me this, but to me, each of these are human potentials. And by not being willing to step into the other world, the only person that's limited is the person who won't take the step. That there are potentials and possibilities and worlds of experience in each of these, if only you're willing to find out. That your mental landscape, your inner world, is big enough to include a journey and a story and growing and changing and having fun playing games along the way, and other possibilities as well. But at this point, the thing that I would look at here would be limitations. That is that if, particularly with the game, if the person has a sense of, you can't make me do this, or don't do that, or I won't do that, that creates a kind of limitation around that. That person might want to open up their possibilities and experience the world as more open. To see that part of what they're on is a journey. This is one that's very often used in spiritual traditions. A way of overcoming personal trauma and tragedy is to see life as a bigger journey. The other limitation I'd like to point out particularly because people who are interested in this kind of work are attracted to it, and that's the limitation of understanding, of trying to find the one true description, the one true model, the one true technique that will resolve all difficulties and costs 39 cents and can be made in your kitchen sink. And to realize that each of these are acts of the imagination. We come from a strange culture in as much as we only get a few stories, but in the Indian culture, they have a much larger cosmology of stories and possibilities, including stuff that pretty much matches our modern science. But they couldn't prove it the way we could. Each culture has its advantages. So someone who's very attracted to understanding, which by the way is kind of like standing on the sidelines, isn't it? You know, like kind of watching life and not really being in it, that what would be good in that case would be the person get in there and experience winning and losing some in life. That experience is being on a journey that is going to end at a certain point. And understand that they can't really know the story that they're writing until they reach the end of it. Or as Nietzsche said of music, he said, you don't listen to music in order to hear it end, but it's not music unless it does. Would somebody like to play around with this up here? Like to try it out? Thanks, come on up. So, Tyler, let's find out a little bit about your world.
Okay.
That is, how do you occupy yourself when you're in employment, since employment is so important culturally?
I edit a computer magazine.
Okay.
So I do some writing, do a lot of organizing and collecting of information.
Okay. And how do you occupy yourself outside of that? What are avocations that you have?
Oh, I play with this stuff, NLP. Let's see. That's probably the major focus outside of work.
Okay. What do you hope to gain from NLP?
Well, it's funny, given what you just said. Understanding was the first thing that popped.
What a surprise. Okay. And what about your work?
Well, actually, I've had a lot of things happen in my life in the last year, and I'm looking to make a big shift. So actually, in light of what you were just talking about, I've been describing it to friends who were scratching their heads. But I said, it's like you're reading this book, and all these things happen to the hero, and you think, wow, this is really bizarre. How's he ever going to get out of this? And you turn the page, and it says Part 2. And you turn to Part 2, and the pages are all blank. So, something about the story...
sort of fits for you.
Yeah, I think. I don't know if I understand it quite yet.
Okay. So, this is something that he's familiar with. This is where we're going. He's already the master of this. He knows how to write the story of his experience. And we could continue along on this. We could develop more choices within the metaphor of story. We could have him begin to imagine a future and what would be in chapter 2, and what if there are 2 or 3 chapter 2s, and we could have him begin to work with that. That would be holding the metaphor the way it is. We could explore alternative metaphors in terms of, well, what if life were a game? What if it were a journey or an adventure? What if it were growing and changing? How would that add to his appreciation of his possibilities and his resources? Or we could alter the inner landscape. That is how he's organized this. So what we're going to do here, because his inner landscape, as my claim, is organized along this larger metaphor of story, of moving from one place to another in order to bring a completion to something, would be, what if you were just to take from chapter 1's just ending here, and chapter 2 is out ahead of you. And I'd like you to go back here just a ways. And I'd like you to relive sort of the latter part of chapter 1, the part you're familiar with.
Okay. Okay. That's the exciting parts.
Okay. Good. We only want you to take like the parts you want to take, okay?
Damn straight.
Okay. And then if we were to look to this chapter 2, this is unwritten here, but it's still in the story form. Then we go, okay. I'd like you just to step off here a moment. I have an agenda. I want more engagement in it, and understanding is almost always looking backward. It's somewhat reflective. You build the story and you look back to see how it's done. The events happen and they begin to build up. So I'm real curious about what would be less familiar for you. Would it be something growing organically? Because nature doesn't understand. Have you noticed this about nature? You ask a tree why it grows, why a child grows up. Just does. We can understand how nature does that, but is nature about understanding? Nature just happens. Or a game. A situation where there's a winner, there's a loser, there are outcomes, there are time frames, and it goes on, there's different games and challenges.
Games are actually a bit like understanding because there are rules, there are points, you can tell where you stand. So the gardening one so far is really the one that's sort of a stretch.
Okay, so let's go with the gardening one then.
Okay.
And I don't really know how you're going to find experiences to relate to this, because this is the thing, is that having the person find moments that are unlike what they normally think about their experience. Whether it will be like watching a time-lapse photography of, you know, the flowers, or if you've seen the desert scenes, the forest, you can watch them change. And that would be a possibility in terms of nature, or maybe going back to times when you were in nature, or maybe you were on a farm as a child, and you thought about the farm as one of the chapters in the story of your history, as opposed to being an opportunity to live in nature.
Yeah, it is a stretch. But yeah, as a tree, that's a metaphor that came to mind.
Okay. You get to be the tree.
Okay.
And to step back into that, and to begin chapter 2, or at least you're going to go through that experience, with the idea of this growing and changing sense. And you're just going to let this unfold in whatever way it does. To consciously direct it is not really to do it. You're just going to get the idea of the tree, the idea of growing and seasons changing and moving through time, and taking that forward and noticing what happens. Just letting it happen.
Well, it's interesting. In the story metaphor, it was like part 2, not chapter 2, but part 2 is like, you know, half of my life was over. So in the story metaphor, I was, 4 years old. Part 1 had ended. I was like halfway through the book, and I had no idea what the book was about, in some respects, at least. And in the tree metaphor, it's sort of like what came unbidden was redwoods. 40 years is nothing to them. So there's this huge, long growth. This is like a tree that's just barely defined its shape, and now it's growing out and becoming more mature and still stronger. So that's definitely a larger. It's a more, God, this is weird. The words that come to mind are all, it's a more grounded, more restful sort of future sense. But I really don't have any set dates for or specific things out there.
Well, redwoods don't have dates for specific things.
That's right.
And also, if I could carry on in that metaphor, is that redwoods don't stand alone. That they are with other trees, and they are part of a larger nature. See, one can write a journal their whole life and not have it discovered till after they're dead, if it's discovered at all. But there's a connection in nature out into a larger world.
Yeah, actually, when I was out there, it was more a sense of providing shelter for others, not necessarily other trees, but yeah.
Now, he still has the possibility of story and what that entailed, but in terms of shifting worlds, the idea, well, I've got to understand what life's about. It's like I've got to understand what cat is about. What's cat about? What's tree about?
Yeah, well, it takes the edge off of having to understand.
See, there's a mistake in thinking there. Because we can understand so much in the world, we sometimes think we can understand everything. Whereas if we try to understand life, we understand it from this direction, every other direction, until we finally understand that the understanding of life comes from the living of it. Only usually we're way out here when that happens. And I'm thinking, why not offer that possibility sooner? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So different worlds within a word. Growing, journeying, gaming, understanding. These again are words that easily slip off of people's tongues. Well, we can't go forward yet. We don't understand this. Meaning they don't have their map yet. They don't have their book written. Their chapter isn't laid out. Or somebody says, we can win this. And in that a world is revealed. Or let's grow this up. All right, let's just get going. Let's just get on the road. And in a moment, a world is revealed to you. If it's one that doesn't draw you to it, you're missing out. It's an opportunity waiting to happen. Now, maybe we can't take all of the paths in life. I know I'm certainly trying. And yet, we can not denigrate the ones that we don't take. And even find it interesting to take an afternoon and watch a football game. Or play with a baby. Or talk to somebody about their garden. Or sit and share a beer while somebody tells you what it's like to sail in the summer winds on a great lake or on the ocean. And other possibilities as well. There's a story that's told in Lawrence of Arabia about how the Bedouins broke into the cities during the uprisings, and they took the faucets back to the desert so that they could get water. And a professor told this story very humorously, saying, well, but of course, you see, they didn't take the pipes. To which I can add, very humorously, but you see, they didn't take the water system of the city. To which you could add humorously, they didn't take the rains and the wind and the oceans and the air. We human beings have this incredible ability to make differences, to cut things up, and to label them. And then we have an even more incredible ability, we can forget we made the labels. So that life really is a game, or life really is this, a journey, or is for understanding, or whatever it is that we think it is. But art, like morality and epistemology, consists of drawing a line somewhere. And we are the generation that's begun to notice that we've been the ones drawing the lines. And we have an opportunity to redraw our maps and to change the shapes of our inner worlds, which will inevitably change the shape of our outer worlds. The world is seamless in every detail, and we are part of the experience the universe is having right now. Each of us is irreplaceable in the movement forward. Even if it's only going out and interacting with the clerk at a grocery store, visiting with neighbors, we represent a connection in this totally seamless world that's moving forward. And yet for us, this world is mostly in our imagination. How much of it is out in the world and how much of it is in people's imaginations? I started out thinking maybe it was 50-50, 50% them or 50% the world, and the number keeps going more and more to mostly our imagination. It's recently been confirmed by work in neurology and eyesight. They've discovered that 70% of eyesight takes place inside the brain. Less than 30% of it is what we actually see. We already have our maps and our grids and our noticing of colors and all that already inside. Just like we already have our metaphors and our worlds within. So what worlds do we want to live in? And what dreams do we want to come true? That's the question I'll leave you with. Thank you.